Welcome to tonight's Finance and Facilities Committee meeting agenda here at the School District of Waukesha. We'll start out with the agenda under general business. Verification meeting was properly posted.
It has been.
And then the second item is opportunity for citizens to speak. Mr. Edlin, give your name and address, please. We all know you, but nevertheless, just for protocol purposes.
One second, Steve.
Hold on, Steve. We gotta give you a microphone.
No LED.
There you go.
Hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I'm here to offer comment tonight on the discussion item. That would be item 4A, the tax incremental district for financing district number 14, where the school district is being asked to expand the TID and lengthen the time. I'm not so sure that that is in the best interest of the school district of Waukesha. There's good TID districts and there's bad TID districts. This TID district has been extremely successful and has worked out exactly the way that a TID district is supposed to. If you'll remember the properties that were at the end of Sunset, it was a wholesale warehouse food distribution center that went under, and it became a blighted property for the city of Waukesha. So what is there now is extremely beneficial to the community. It adds significant value to the community. It's in the right location, and it has prospered very well. And as a result of that, the TID actually paid off quite early. So the money that the school district would garner from this thing closing would be substantial. If it were extended and expanded, I don't know that there's going to be additional value to that TID. What's being proposed to put in the TID really isn't anything that would increase the taxable value of that district. So I think in the long run, the school district would lose money by going along with this. I would suggest that the school district make a recommendation to the city to close this out, and if they feel that it's that possibly beneficial to the community, to create another TID district and let it stand on its own. I would contrast this to the TID district that we had where the baseball stadium was originally proposed in Frame Park a number of years ago. That whole entire downtown district failed. The TID was failing. There was a problem with collecting revenue because, quite frankly, the Clark Hotel didn't work out like everybody thought it would. So the district had to be expanded. The length of time had to be lengthened. And hopefully it's going to work out in the long run. But that was an example of a bad TID district. So financially, I think the district's going to leave money on the table if they decide to expand it. So that's my comment. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Tom Piasek. Can you hear me? Last meeting, there was a closed session to discuss the MOU between SC Waukesha and the School District of Waukesha. Since we weren't privy to those discussions, I went to an acquaintance in the legal community to have him look at the contracts. Here are some of the concerns he raised to me. First, he said, an MOU normally interprets the terms of a contract, but this one adds additional terms, the indoor space and the grass fields. And since the MOU was not executed in the same manner as the first contract with board approval, it should not alter the terms of the first contract. He believes because of this, the MOU would need to be considered a separate contract to grant these terms to SC, but he doesn't think it would survive as a standalone contract because in a valid contract, both sides need to receive consideration. And the MOU, the school district receives nothing. And then finally, with respect to the fact that SC is now a division of Rock Ventures, here that due to the assignment clause in the contract, clause 11 and 13, Rock Venture needs the district's written consent in order for this contract to be assigned to them, and as far as we know, that has not occurred. His biggest concern was that the district would sign a new turf contract that adds the terms of the MOU, and this sounds like what is happening. The district seems to be negotiating with Rock Ventures to legitimize this mess of a contract. As a quick overview, Rock Ventures is a Franklin-based private equity firm that owns, among other things, the Milwaukee Wave, the Rock Sports Complex, and their soon-to-be anchor, the Ballpark Commons. Ballpark Commons is a $130 million development that includes a baseball stadium, commercial and retail buildings, apartments, and the only full-size indoor soccer field in the state. So knowing this background of Rock Ventures, if Mike Zimmerman, their owner, came to your school board meeting out of the blue on Wednesday and said he'd like to use your district gyms for free at the same priority as your district-based programs, and he would like $29 per hour turf stadium access, you'd laugh him out of the room. So why are we considering a new contract with Rock Ventures? The answer isn't to sign a new contract that gives 1,000 hours of indoor space to Rock unless the athletic director somehow figure it out. The space simply doesn't exist. The only answer is to terminate the MOU. The board never signed it, and you don't have to answer for this invalid contract. You owe it to the kids in the district to take every legal avenue possible to end the MOU, and there seem to be several. For the turf contract, given the assignment clause, it seems like you have leverage to get fair market value for those fields now. Using real bulk pricing on those $100 per hour fields, I would say $70 per hour is fair. That would give the Rock 700 hours for $50,000 per year. I'm pretty sure these athletic directors could find a way to make use of the 1,000 hours they would be getting back of turf access. As board members, you have two choices. When it comes time for your next election, you can say you voted to return thousands of hours of district facilities back to the kids in the district, or you can say you voted to put a Franklin-based private equity and real estate company on equal footing with the district-based volunteer programs.
Name and address, please.
Tom Kelnick, address is South 20 West 27809 Came Terrace, Waukesha.
Tim Newbert, address is 40 Nashotah Road, Delafield, Wisconsin.
Good evening. We are two of the managing partners for Diamond Club Entertainment. Our company has received conceptual approval from the city of Pewaukee at the current Pewaukee Golf Club. Our plans consist of senior housing, single owner occupied housing, a public market, extension of the current county bike trail, 2 artificial baseball fields with 1 being a stadium setting. We are here to understand the process because we feel within the next few months, we're hopeful to be in front of you people with our developers funded TIF and how this project will benefit the school district, the county, WCTC, and the taxpayers. If anybody from this board has any questions after the meeting, we will stick around for any questions that you might have. Thanks for your time.
Okay, thank you. Additional questions, comments?
Hi, I'm Vicky Bingenheimer, 2315 Patrick Lane in Waukesha. I'm here basically to understand why it is that you would even disagree with what Tom Piasek says. It makes no sense to me that the private company would get priority over our kids and our school facilities for a pittance of what they should be paying. I understand that SC Waukesha gave us a small amount of money for the turf, but it doesn't equate to what is being portrayed as. My understanding back when it all started was that they built these facilities for us when actually they did not. So why they're giving priority over our own kids for our facilities is, I just don't understand. So that's why I'm here. But as a volunteer, I volunteer for the school, for the soccer. So I'm not just here just to complain. I mean, I understand my daughter has been in select soccer for 12 years. My son has been in select soccer for 5. The same son also plays for the Junior North Stars. So I understand court time, turf time, facilities. I understand all that, but I just would assume that as a school board that you would put the Waukesha school kids have their priority above SC Waukesha. So my understanding is that the vote will not be tonight. It will be postponed, which is what I hope, so that this shady contract can be made very public, so everyone understands that it's quite honestly a joke. So I hope you take that into consideration, that SC Waukesha should not take priority over our kids. Thank you.
Me again. Hi.
Just to be, we need to go ahead and do the name and address again, if possible. Now it is. Yeah, I think it's on now. Oh, wait. It's on.
You haven't started my
Yeah,
time yet, right?
yeah.
All right.
1 minute left.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Joe. Kelly P. Asik, N22W26515, Shooting Star Road, Pewaukee, Wisconsin. We're in the Waukesha School District. We started this journey. I started this journey with you in October. I didn't come here with a vendetta against SC Waukesha or a soccer versus basketball complaint. I really wanted to bring to the school board as a parent challenges that we were having with our youth basketball program. Facilities have been tight for the last 4 years. We've had to seek facilities outside and they're expensive. We've had to ramp up our volunteer efforts to pay for them because we don't want to raise the fees to our kids. And then this year, things got tough. I mean, frankly, the district kind of pulled the rug out from under us when the new system went in place and new fees were assessed, and we were cut from 8 to 4 facilities that we would be able to have access to. And so we started asking questions. And when we were asking those questions, we didn't expect to find out that there were contracts that were giving away facilities that belong to the school district for free. We didn't expect to find out that there was an MOU that hadn't been communicated to the public or hadn't been reviewed by the board, but we did. And we would have been irresponsible if we didn't bring that to your attention and ask for an explanation or for help to resolve it. The more time we spent trying to figure out how we got here, the more we learned about SC Waukesha and what they were doing in our facilities. So with good intentions, really with all the best of intentions, we pointed out problems and leverage in those contracts that we would have the opportunity to potentially right wrongs in those agreements. It was an opportunity to rectify what is clearly a bad deal. But you kind of turned it around on us. Some people with SC Waukesha pointed fingers at me and my husband, like we were skewing facts and our intentions weren't good, or we were villainizing other organizations. Eliminating this MOU is good for the kids in our district, and we have the opportunity to do it. What I don't understand is why we're trying to replace it with something new. The organization that you started this journey with has changed. Why would we assign what was intended for a local nonprofit soccer club to a national multi-million-dollar venture capital real estate company? And so not knowing your path forward, because there have been so many closed-door sessions, I just really want to leave you with 2 things. First, we don't need an MOU or a facilities amendment with any organization, much less SC Waukesha, if we have a really good facility policy that's fair and puts our kids first. And I think that's where we need to start. It seemed like this group stumbled over that a little bit last month, and there's dozens of great policies out there with all of our neighboring districts that you can look at and we can learn from. The second is that the junior athletics programs are nothing like SC Waukesha. Please don't concede to put us in the same groups. You know, my husband's pretty shy. He didn't even make a speech or make a toast at our wedding. So for him to come here 3 months in a row and try to help explain what these organizations are that we're trading our kids for, it means it's important to us. We've paid for some of these kids to eat. We've paid some of their fees. We've washed their uniforms. We've gone out of our way to make these programs affordable. We are all volunteers. We don't make a penny off of these programs. By extending equal status to SC Waukesha, you are telling the kids in our district that the rich kids in the programs get priorities to the poor kids in the district programs. It's not right. They're taking over our facilities and people are seeing it. So I'm asking you, please, Rock Ventures doesn't need our charity, but there are a lot of families and kids in our district who do, and that's where our efforts and our facilities should be. Thank you.
Any additional comments from the public? Okay, I want to thank everybody for staying mostly in time. And other than the microphone problem, I think we were pretty much on time tonight. With that, we'll move on to our action items for tonight, which is the approval of the minutes from the November meeting.
I move approval.
Second. Okay, we have a motion for approval from Mr. Como, a second from Mr. McCaffrey. Any further discussion on the minutes? Not seeing any further discussion. All in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Next action item is approval of vouchers.
All right, we had several questions this month, so I'll go through the questions with answers. Voucher number 325119 for Kramer Madison, $13,258.27. This is the company that was hired to print the materials, the promotional materials for the referendum. So it's the business cards, the fact sheets, display items, and things like that. Voucher 325173, advanced auto parts, but this was more of a high-level question about blanket POs in general. And the question was, how many blanket POs do we have in the district? And there isn't really a way in our accounting system to report on them. But we can, when we look at each of the sites, there's generally about 4, one for office supplies, one for copy paper, one for art supplies, and one for music repairs. So each site generally has those 4 in place, and then the service building has quite a few in place. And that's to make it easier for the maintenance workers at the sites to be able to go over and get what they need when they need it for repair at the location versus having to go through and getting a separate PO each time. The question was, how do we make sure that we don't have fraud going on with those? And we minimize the abuse by, we have the secretaries review and process all the invoices and the receipts. So if someone does go to, say, auto parts and pulls up, buys something, they have to provide a receipt to the site secretary to be able to process it. So we get receipts for everything, nothing gets paid. If we get a bill from the company, we don't have all the receipts in place, our AP person does go and track it all down, works with the sites to get the information. So we have proof that all the purchases have at least had a set of eyes on them.
Mr. Como has a question, I think.
Yes, sir.
And when do we regenerate those blanket
Every year.
POs?
At the
Okay,
beginning
so
of
it's
every
at the
year.
beginning of the year.
Correct.
And so they're for probably a specific amount,
That
though,
is
right?
correct. And we review and make sure that they're not going above and beyond the amounts that the principal has approved them for. So the secretaries enter and the principal approves, yep, I'm willing to spend $1,000 here at Staples. If they go over that amount, they have to put in a new PO for the year.
Okay, so typically who is asking for the blanket PO is giving you a maximum amount? Do you guys then look at previous history to see if that's in the ballpark, and if it isn't, we come back and question them whether that's an appropriate amount?
When they come through and I approve them, I wouldn't say I go back and look at all the history, but I know their range, and when I look at the approvals, if someone was to suddenly put through a $50,000 blanket PO, that would trigger some questions for me. So I have a general idea of what is spent in the blanket POs, but it's more in the monitoring of the spend of them. The principals have to approve all the purchase orders. So we're expecting them to also look at things that are being charged to their site. So, excuse me, the principals or the budget managers of the departments, they have to approve all purchase orders before they come to our office. So we're expecting that they review their purchase orders before they hit approve to make sure that they also agree with those amounts, because they're ultimately coming out of their state budgets.
Okay, is this generally working?
Yep. And we have the other,
Just before you go on, since Mr. Como was kind enough to interrupt, I just want to put in a point of clarification.
yes,
We don't do promotional items for the referendum. We do informational items for
fact,
it.
absolutely.
yeah.
I'm very sorry.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's, just want to make sure, words are powerful things.
That
We
was
do
a
informational
really
items.
poor choice of words on my part.
We can report
absolutely.
facts, we cannot take sides.
And I don't know what we were promoting.
Apologize. We were not. We
We
were
were as
for-
informational?
It was fact sheets, it was the business cards to show where to get more information on the website regarding the facts, and I do apologize, that was a very poor
You
choice
don't
of
need
words.
to apologize, but I thought it'd be worthwhile correcting.
Good
just-
clarification.
Appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Go ahead.
Okay. The principals also, just one last point on the blanket purchase orders, the principals do have the ability at any point in time to drill down into their purchases. So if they see an account that looks a little off, like the spending is off on that account, they can go right into Skyward at any point in time and drill down and look at the expenses that are coming through there. And the principals are very good at looking at their budgets, because we get questions and calls all the time. Hey, why did this get coded to my account? So we always look into those when they call, so they are viewing them.
Okay, good. I understand why we have them from an efficiency perspective, so. And when you run lean, you need to do some of those things too, so. Yep, okay, thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so, voided checks. Questions on voided checks that we didn't have the list of the check numbers in the report this month, and I do apologize for that. We were doing cleanup on uncashed checks, and the list was very long this month, and so we opted not to put it in the report just because of the pure length of it. I have given you a copy, so every one of you now has a list of every voided check that ties to the amount that was in the voucher report. So I do apologize, that was us trying to conserve paper, but we will not do that from now on. We will make sure they're all included in there moving forward. Any questions on that? Okay, question on that, there were 40 pages of credit card P-card vouchers that were all made on 11/23, which was Black Friday. So I assure you, we were not all out spending on Black Friday. What happens is there's a statement period for the credit card, like the P-card's like a normal credit card statement. It goes through the 8th of the month, and then there's an automatic pull from our bank account on the 23rd of every month to pay the prior month's statement. And this month it happened to be on Black Friday. So those purchases were all from the time frame of October 7th to November 8th was the payment on the 23rd. And if the 23rd is not if it's a weekend or a holiday, it gets paid on the next business day. Any questions on that? Okay. One question was, what does undifferent cur mean? And that stands for undifferentiated curriculum, which is just a function that is a little more generic. Usually we try to tie each spending to a specific curriculum when it's instruction related, like art or science or math. But at the elementary level or some other cases where you can't tie it to a specific curriculum item, it goes under this undifferentiated curriculum. And so that just means it's for instruction, but it can't be tied to a specific area of curriculum. And it's most often used at elementary because the teachers teach a lot of different varying subjects. Any questions on that? Okay, so then there was a question on the $20,000 maintenance for wood chip installation service, and it was dated 11/28. 11/28 is the check date. The service actually happened in August, and it was all the wood chips at our playgrounds that we refresh every summer to make them safe for the kids in fall, come school time. They just billed us late on it, so it was paid in November. And then this question came up, and I thought I would just share this so in case other people have that problem. The pivot table reports, you can't open them in Google Sheets because Google does not recognize pivot tables. It doesn't have that functionality. So if you go to open it while you're in Google, you're going to get just the headers. You actually have to make sure that particular report is opened in Excel, and then you'll see the pivot tables. Any questions? If not, that is it for the vouchers.
Okay, do I have a motion for motion for approval of the vouchers?
So moved.
Need a second? Motion, Mr. McCaffrey, a second, Ms. Voigt. Additional discussion on the vouchers? Informational items. Okay, seeing no further discussion, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 5-0. Now we'll go to those informational items. Monthly budget report.
Now you all look so
This should be
forward
constantly
to
in
it
your head,
every month.
informational. You do it every month.
I know. I will never live that one down. And I won't make that mistake again.
We'll let Darren make it next time.
Yeah, spread the wealth, right?
Okay, so moving into November, everything's looking, as usual, pretty good for our budget. I'm not seeing any real anomalies. As we go through our local sources, our biggest source of local revenue, again, is just our student fees and our building rental payments. We're tracking at 1.82% versus 1.75 last year, so that's not one of our biggest sources. We had no interdistrict or intermediate sources. State sources, we received our first AGR payment, which is the old SAGE program, the Student Achievement Gap program, and that was $79,000. Our equalization aid came in December, so we're starting to see more after November. Federal sources, we received our first Title I grant payment, and we'll start seeing more grant payments monthly now on the federal side of things. Other revenues, we did receive $224,516, another E-rate rebate, so we've been getting those rather steadily this year, so that's nice. It's difficult to plan for them, so now this budget category looks way over because we've gotten quite a few more than, we just never know when they're going to actually come in after they get filed, so. Overall, our general fund, we're sitting at 6.6% collected over 6.10 of the prior year. Expenses, salary and benefits, as always, are our highest, and they're running right in track with where we expect them to be. Our salary, we've spent 30.25% of our budget, and our benefits 30.5%. Purchase services, main expenses are utilities and tuition. That's pretty typical. The tuition are who we pay our satellite sites for, some special education tuition, those type of things. There are two areas that are showing way over budget already, and I just wanted to point those out. The phones and technology systems, both of those are managed by the IT budget, and they do manage at their bottom line, so there's really no need for concern at this point. I have talked to Steve about it, because the phones were one thing that looks way off, and he's aware that we need to make sure we're accounting for that elsewhere. But we've spent 20.48% of our purchase services and 22.63% last year. Non-capital objects, general supplies, that's still our biggest spend in that category. Capital objects, we did have a vehicle purchase for an F-450 truck. That was one of our largest spends for the month. There are some large negative amounts that might look odd in the capital equipment, and some of that is due to $46,000 in sale of old technology that got credited back into the Waukesha One account that falls into there. So that credit, we didn't have expenditures to offset it in that particular month, so it's just showing up as a negative and looks a little odd. Equipment rental is due to a coding change by DPI. We had to change some code numbers around that they've changed for us. But overall, We're at 65.32% of our capital objects. It's higher than last year, but it was expected to be higher still due to the timing of the projects, so nothing to be concerned about. No debt retirement in November, minimal activity in insurance, no transfers. Others, mainly dues and fees. Again, there's a large miscellaneous credit in miscellaneous, and that's an account we use to when the business office, when the district has to pay for an activity account expenditure. That's usually a salary-related thing or something that would generate a 1099 form. We have to pay for it at the district office, and then the activity accounts reimburse us. So it's just a timing of when we got paid from an activity account for an expense we had in a prior month, or activity accounts, excuse me. Overall, our expenditures are coming in at 6.31% versus 16.08 last year, so everything's lining up good. Fund 27, we had our first categorical aid payment for special education in November of $895,464. We've collected 3.16 of our special education revenue, but that's pretty typical for this time of year. Expenses, spec ed still continues to be salary and benefits are our highest, and they're coming in where we would expect them to be. Purchase services just mainly continues to be the private school tuition and general supplies for non-capital, but overall we're at 14.55% of our budget compared to 14.77 last year. So overall, there's nothing to be alarmed about. Questions?
Ms. Ronachek?
Thank you. We didn't buy a new truck, did we?
That's what the bill said. Well, I'm not sure if it was new or used.
A brand new truck?
I'm not sure if it was new or used. I would need to double check that. I thought it was new, though.
I know we bought a used truck in fall. I don't know what billing this is. I'd have to check on the specific.
I can get more information and have it sent in a
Still.
Friday update.
I know we bought one from the village of Pewaukee that was used, but I don't know if that's this truck.
This one was not purchased from the village. This was purchased
Oh.
from,
Yeah, I'd have to check then.
And then do you know how we sold the technology for 46?
yep, we have a company that we partner with called Velocity. Let me get that.
Market velocity?
Market Velocity, and I don't know if we have a contract with them or they bid out. I would have to talk to Mr. Schloman about that.
Okay.
But they sold it through a company as a lot versus trying to sell out individual pieces here and there.
Good. Thank you.
We just tell you what they're going to evaluate your material, and they tell you what they're worth and what they're going to give you.
Get all
Probably
of it.
iPads is probably what it was, eh?
Yeah, we guess.
Yes, that's what it was.
Yep.
So you said that truck was like a F-450?
That's what it said on the bill.
Truck.
That's a big truck, yeah. You won't find them very easily on the used
The
market.
used market, right.
Yeah. Can't let you ask questions, otherwise we'll have a problem with our structure. Sorry.
That's a big truck.
But thanks for asking if you can ask questions. Go ahead back to the
I
truck.
will pull that invoice and look at it again, but I was pretty sure it was a new truck, but I will double check that. And we will have your Friday update. You send that out, or?
Send it out then.
Okay.
And just regarding asking questions, to remind everybody in the audience, board members actually like phone calls as long as they're not screaming at people. And also, if you stick around after the meeting, we'll try to make sure that whatever question you may have gets answered by whomever can answer it, okay?
That, just so you know, that size truck would have been
Yeah, it's first plowing.
a lot of acres to plow between 2 a.m.
Your mic's off.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, they do need, whether or not it was new, the problem is they do need some pretty good-sized trucks to keep, clean off, especially our high school parking lots in a expedient.
And there have been trucks that have been sold, some used trucks that we have sold recently. So those, we would have to, they put those out on an auction website.
It was like a government
Government auction.
marketplace. Kind of, you
So
can
other
post those
government
things.
entities go and look for that. So I know that it isn't just adding more, it's replacing things that,
If it's a plowing truck, which is what I assumed it was.
I believe that's what it was, but I don't
That's
know my
probably
trucks
one of the
well
most severe duties you can ask for a truck. Most people who have plowing trucks don't have them very long because it is very hard on. They usually don't have 450 plowing. I mean,
Yeah.
but I guess that's the nature of a school district, that we probably should have that type of truck. Mr. Como?
I'd like to make a request. In the past, we have had a summary sheet on our health insurance. We're self-insured, as we all know, and like to kind of keep track of some of the basics there, including the reserve funds and making sure that that's constantly at a healthy level. Are we still in that 5.5 to
believe
6?
it's 5.3 right now.
5.3, okay, so it's still,
Still very healthy.
the reserve amount is still healthy,
Correct.
okay.
And I can include that. We're a little behind in getting some of the expenditures in with a newer benefits person in there, so we're getting caught up, but we monitor it and watch it every month at where
Okay.
we're going. But I will start including
You know
that back in.
the report that I'm
Yeah, the
talking
IBNR.
about?
I know
exactly which
that would
one you're
be-
talking about.
That would be very helpful.
Yeah, and we've talked about probably in kind of penciled in around February, bringing in Beneco and just kind of giving a report on where our health insurance program is in total as a separate agenda item.
Right.
Otherwise, that spreadsheet just tends to look like a bunch of numbers all over, so.
Things like, where are we at with our stopgap insurance? Do we ever use it? You know, those
I can
kinds-
answer yes to
Yes,
that.
we
kinds of
do.
things, so, yeah,
It's
That one
a
I can answer.
blessing. It's definitely worth the price of the premium.
okay.
I think another issue on the drug side, or on the healthcare side, was our change in the drug plan, getting out from under United Healthcare. How did that work out for us?
Both from a service level for staff and I think cost-wise, I think it's been a solid move, but that would be part of the report from Beneco as well, as how is Navitus performing.
The other thing I'll point out is, we do have the new tax levy amounts in there, if you wanted to see what districts are, what areas, what municipalities are being charged for the levy amount for next year. The breakdown is in this report.
Yeah.
We won't start collections until January, so.
Mr. Como?
Yeah, a lot of our constituents believe that our school district is just the city of Waukesha and the town of Waukesha, but there are 7 municipalities that we do touch. And that's what's nice about this breakdown, so we appreciate that.
Ms. Ryanchek?
Thank you. I just had one more question. While you were talking about our general fund revenue collection percentage is higher than last year, why would that be?
For the overall,
Yeah, it's coming in at 6.6 instead of 6.10.
part of it is we're collecting less local revenue with the property taxes, so the amount is smaller. So when you're collecting things in that are outside of the property tax, because the property tax is the big amount of that, the other remaining items are going to look, that are coming in sooner, are going to look like they're coming in at a higher percentage because the overall amount is lower. But once the taxes start to come in, it's going to start to flush out.
Okay. Thank you.
The other answer to that is year to year, the budget and local sources might be just different. So the denominator of those percentages might shift slightly, which probably plays a factor in that as well.
Well, all I know is my property tax was lower this year. So
That's a good thing.
here's city versus town, I guess.
Yeah, you better believe it is. Yes, sir.
Okay, any other questions on? Get back to my agenda. I keep flipping back and forth. Okay, let's move on to the audit report. I see our friendly auditor is here again this year.
Yes, this is Dave McCow with, he's a CPA and shareholder member of the government and non-for-profit teams at Schenck.
Yeah, this will be the most excitement I have since the Marquette, Wisconsin game on
He's here
Saturday.
to report on our 17-18 audit, which just wrapped up.
Okay, welcome. So there's 2 documents I'm going to go through. Certainly, we'll touch on some of the highlights, but if anyone has any questions, I'll be more than happy to entertain the questions. The first one is your annual financial report. which is the financial statements of the district. If we turn to page 1 of the annual financial report, it is our independent auditor's report. This report is important because it goes through the financial statements that are contained in this document. It talks about these financial statements are derived directly from the financial records of the district. So what you're seeing on a monthly basis is the same information that we use to assist and prepare the financial report that you have in front of you. Our responsibility is to apply procedures on the balances of the district and issue an opinion on the accuracy of the financial statements. So on the bottom of page 1, we indicate that in our opinion, the financial statements referred to above present fairly in all material respects. So that is what we call an unmodified opinion. It means that we would make no modifications to the report. It is the best opinion you can receive on your financial statements. It indicates that the financial records are being maintained and the financial statements as presented appropriately report the financial information of the district. On the bottom of page 1, there was one new standard that was implemented by the district. It relates to financial reporting of post-employment benefits or your OPEB plan. So the district has always reported, but the standards of which OPEB plans are reported in the financial statements changed this year. So the district did get an actuarial study with the new standards and implemented those standards as part of this audit report. Then if we turn to page 2 talks about other required information. It talks about supplemental information and talks about all the other things that are contained in this document. The only thing I would want to point out is in the back of this document, the district did undergo what we call a single audit on the federal and state programs. So you received a little over $8 million of federal dollars. Much of that passed through from the state of Wisconsin and DPI, and a little over $64 million of federal or of state dollars. So our audit not only looks at the financial statements that we'll briefly go through, but also looks at how the district manages the federal and state financial assistance and awards that you receive. And we're pleased to indicate that we had no findings or question cost on any of the programs that the district managed, which means that from a compliance perspective, the district complied with all the requirements of the federal and state programs that you were managing in the current year. Starting on page 3 through page 15 is what we call management's discussion and analysis, and it's an opportunity with a framework of what you're required to discuss. Talk about some of the highlights and some of the graphs and some of the information that would correlate to your current year. So we would encourage the committee to review it. It's well done. It goes through all the different disclosures and discussions that you're required to accomplish, and it also looks at multiple years within your financial statements. Then if we turn to page 16, 17, and 18 are your government-wide financial statements. So when you're adopting budgets, you're not adopting them on the basis of these pages, but these pages really represent the district under a full accrual method. So one of the major changes here is you'll see when you look at page 16, all your liabilities are recorded, all your assets are recorded, including the buildings, the equipment, things that are used to provide services to the students in the district. So your total assets right now are approximately $134 million compared to $117 million for the prior year. Major change, if you look at the kind of compare last year to this year, your cash and investments are up. That was partly due to the positive general fund balance that you had, and also the net pension assets. So you'll see you're currently presenting a little under $17 million in the net pension, compared to a balance of zero for the prior year. So if you remember, this is the district's proportionate share of the Wisconsin retirement system. And because the investment returns in 2017 for the pension system as a whole beat their expectations, so they go out to market hoping to get a 7.2%. They far exceeded that in the current year. The Wisconsin retirement system flipped from a liability perspective to an asset perspective. So that's the major change. It's not like you can take that 16, 17 million and go pay some bills, but it reflects the fact that the Wisconsin retirement system is well managed going forward. Liabilities are currently about 56 million. You'll see that's very comparable to the prior year. You'll see the net pension last year was about 4.7. So you see about a $20 million swing in your proportionate share. The other thing you'll see is the growth in your other post-employment benefits. That's what I talked about. The implementation of GASB Statement 75 did impact the liability being presented and the disclosure of that liability. And then your net position or net ownership, you're reporting a net position of about 74 million compared to about 80 million. Once again, primarily due to implementing the other post-employment benefits, the new disclosures, and also the adjustments related to the Wisconsin retirement system. So even though the Wisconsin retirement system did shift from a liability to an asset, many of the changes do get amortized over a period of time to your operating statement. When you look at your net investment in capital assets, that's a very strong 62 million. What that means is that if you look at your long-term obligations, you only have about a $3.1 million general obligation debt at the present time. So that's payable over 3 more years at about $1 million. So you're at a very low debt position relative to your capital asset position going forward. If we turn to page 17 and 18, 17 and 18 go through the changes, and you can see right in the middle of the page that change in net position, very consistent, so about a $1.2 million decrease this year. That's primarily due to depreciation. It's primarily due to the other post-employment and the Wisconsin retirement system. You'll see the impact of implementing the new standard was a direct adjustment or cumulative adjustment of about 4.7 million. So that's why you go from about 80 million to about a 74 is really 4.7 million of that related to the implementation of the new standard. And then starting on page 19 is your fund financials. So like in past, we've pulled out your fund financials into our management communications, and we'll go through that, the management communications, unless anyone has any questions on the annual financial report. Okay. So if we go to the management communications, here's where we kind of summarize some of the key financial information. So we kind of boil down and boil out a lot of the information and put it into a comparison. This is a document that is titled Management Communications. It starts, and there's about 4 pages that really walk through the results of the audit and talk through how our audit is more than just a financial audit. Our audit also entails looking at compliance with laws and regulations and internal controls. So when you think of the audit of the district, we're really focused on not only the financial statements, but we're focused on the controls and the infrastructure that the district has put in place regarding safeguarding both the assets and also the compliance with laws and regulations. So we're pleased to say that both those went extremely well. We had no areas of concern as we summarized on page 2. Page 3 talks a little bit about accounting estimates. Obviously, the actuaries, when actuaries do your incurred but not reported reserves related to the self-insurance, those are based on projections. We can't wait for the actual dollars to come in. So the management of the district, working with consultants or actuaries, do estimate certain things based on assumptions and comes up with some estimates of actual activities. Our audit does review those, and we believe all the estimates are reasonable and appropriate. Yes.
Just so everybody knows, we're on the smaller document now, is that correct?
Yes. Yep,
okay.
correct, sorry.
Real quick on the actuarial post-employment benefits, Darren, is that, how often do we get that evaluated?
Every other, right?
It was every 3 years.
Thank you.
The rest of page 3 and page 4 would identify if we had any difficulties in completing the audit or any disagreements with management as part of our audit process. We're pleased to say that from our perspective, the audit went very well. The district was prepared as when we came in. We do this audit in a 2-phase approach. We do an interim phase where we come in and spend a lot of time looking at controls, looking at compliance, and then we come back in August and do our final audit once a lot of the data is available from a financial perspective. So both times the audit went very well from our team, and we do appreciate the staff here at the district. We do work with the finance group very closely, but when we get into the compliance and the various different grants, we work with multiple layers, or when we get into the pupil activity funds and actually go to the schools, we do work with many people throughout the district, and everyone was very cooperative in completing your audit. Page 5.
Just real quick, Dave. I know when you're looking at the controls, you're not looking at all of our controls. You take a sample. Could you talk to what areas you sampled, and you rotate those throughout the years, right? And
We actually always look at the various basic controls related to receipts, disbursements. We sample transactions in each of those, but every year we look at each of the cycles that either record budget amendments in budget, record journal entries, record financial reporting related to receipts and payroll. So those are looked at every year on a sample transaction. So we don't look at every transaction. Various different schools, we do go into schools and look at some of the pupil activity funds and do look at somewhat of a rotational basis there, but really hit the bigger schools every year just from that perspective.
Oh, okay.
So. Correct. Yep.
Right. For the single audit, we cycle through the different grant programs, so that
Oh, okay.
might be what you're thinking of,
That
that one year
might
it'll be
be-
Title I, and then the next year might be flow-through. So they're not, every program isn't audited every year in the single audit. All of the controls for those programs are audited.
Okay.
And oftentimes, obviously, financial reporting, if you have problems in one grant, you're going to have problems in multiple. So a lot of times they go through multiple different, but like a special ed or food service has different testing and different people we work with. Yeah, correct. Thank you. So
What page are we on now?
we're on page 5.
Okay.
So page 5 really summarizes the financial position and focuses on fund balance. So when we look at fund balance of the district, we're looking really at, what's the change from last year to this year? Is there any significant impact? How does that put your fund balance? Clearly, the most significant fund is your general fund. You can see the general fund did have an increase in the current year. That increase is primarily in the area of unassigned, so overall increase. But that was really reflective of a positive budget year because your budget did have a projected decrease, and you actually turned a positive balance on due to some increased revenues. But overall, really strong financial position or results in the current year from a budget perspective. The other funds are very comparable, so your capital projects funds may go up or down based on transfers or other resources, but overall, most of your fund balance is really sitting in your general fund, and when you look at your fund balance as a percentage of your expenditures, you are above currently your policy or your kind of your range of 10 to 15%. So that indicates really as you enter the current year that we're in right now, certainly in a strong financial position. Doesn't mean that budgets that you adopt are easy to adopt, but does mean that you have a very strong balance sheet going into the current year. Any questions on that?
Before we move on, did you have a question, Mr. Como?
Statement.
Go ahead, Mr. Como, but I have to ask Karen first if she has a question or a statement. No? Mr. Como?
It's taken us a lot of years to build up to this point. I remember when we first put together the policy, and we were at, I don't know, a couple percentage points. So our general fund balance has taken us a lot of years to build up to this. We're really fortunate now, too, in terms of not having to take a short-term borrow to meet our cash flow needs throughout the year. That's taken us a long time to get to that point. We've been in that position now for a couple of years, a few years, 3 years maybe, 4 years, which has been good. We've always have had to take out, or we've chosen to take out a line of credit from a local bank just in case, but I believe this year we decided to pass on that, so we saved some money there too. Long-winded, but basically what I'm trying to get at is it took us a lot of years to get to this point where I remember where on our short-term borrow, some years we would have upwards of $900,000 of interest we would pay just so that we could meet our cash flow needs during the year. So it's really good that we have a strong fund balance.
Yeah, there's a couple things I'd like to add to that. You know, this is kind of an important point. Sorry to break into your presentation, but we do, for once, have an audience here tonight, which is very unusual. And there's a number of areas, and I want to emphasize the fund balance we have today is maybe not the fund balance we'll have tomorrow. We are seeing greater and greater challenges in staffing, and we've been able to kind of squirrel away a war chest so that we can maintain a good, healthy, quality staff in our district. So that fund balance reflects that. You look at the overall savings that we've been able to generate over the years, going to self-insured was a significant factor in that. Modifying how we recruit and compensate staff over the years has been a significant factor in that. And in that regard, Act 10 was a little bit of a help, but we actually negotiated that change with the union back when they could still bargain those things. So either way, it was going to happen. So those were two of the big significant. The other thing was the OPEB changes that we made as part of our also negotiating with the union prior to Act 10, but implemented kind of through Act 10. We've been able to reduce our OPEB obligations significantly over the years. We have been blessed that we have a superintendent and a business manager that are like heads and shoulders above everybody else when it comes to these financial issues. And, you know, our business manager probably gets a lot of tough questions from just about everybody, but it doesn't mean we don't value the quality that he's delivered to us through trying to make sure that we understand where our surpluses come from and where our potential deficits could arise from, and that helped build a healthy fund balance.
One other thing, the healthy fund balance will help. Our constituents had just voted in favor of the referendum passing. So when we go to take out those bonds, this will help with our bond rating having this favorable fund balance. So,
and I'm expecting we'll get that next step up, which there's only 4 districts in the state that have that level of credit rating.
4 out of 420 some.
Yeah. I should also point out, Mr. O'Brien talked about the OPEB liability. In 2000, right now it's at 42 million. In 2008, that was like 138, 140.
I think we've hit as high as 195, I thought was the highest we had hit.
Could be. So, yeah, so that, again, the changes we've made, as well as eliminating some other debt issues related to the OPEB liability has really helped.
Yeah.
So, don't want to try and skew the grading that we're going to get at the end, but I think we're in a pretty strong position compared to where we were 15 years ago. What I will say is that we will continue to look for every opportunity to add to our fund balance. You can never have enough. There's just too many things that can go wrong that we need to have a healthy fund balance with. At the same time, we're restricted in raising taxes under, and I think that will always be, and as it should be. So we won't be adding to our fund balance by raising taxes. We'll be adding to our fund balance by taking advantage of every opportunity to add to our fund balance that makes sense for the district.
Thank you. But yeah, and like you said, I mean, fund balance is really the opportunity to meet next year's challenges. So, and then on pages 6 and 7, there are 2 new standards that will impact future reports potentially. So these are really informational only, and we'll work with the district in implementing them in the future. So what that means is that we had no comments or other observations on any of the financial. Everything worked really well, and this is really just understanding that GASB continues to be active in creating new standards, and these 2 new standards will have potentially some impact. The first one relates to leases and the second one to fiduciary activities. So we'll work with the district in implementing those. With that, I'll entertain any questions you may have.
You've already gone over your quota.
I know.
Go ahead, Mr. Cohen.
Actually, Dave, we heard about the merger that's going on with your firm. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that, and how does that impact us, if at all?
Yep. It really has no impact. We are merging with Clifton Larson Allen, CLA, effective January 1st. But from a standpoint, they have been active in public sector just like us, and so it provides us bigger strength. But from a service perspective, our clients will be continued to be served by the same staff and team that has served them in the past. So from that perspective, it won't have any impact.
Cliff,
They were our former auditors. We bid it out, and then Schenck won. So we'll be getting maybe getting some of those people back.
Okay. When was the last time we bid this out, Darren?
I think it was 5 years ago.
Yeah, because we renewed a 3-year agreement.
I think they offered to cut their rate in half if we brought them back, right?
Dave, I read that in the Wall Street Journal.
Yeah. So if they're coming back, then boy, good for us.
Actually, we don't want them back. We like our team that we get here every summer. So.
Okay, and we have a legacy Mr. Warren question, and we still believe in letter grades at the board level at least. And you got this question last year and maybe the year before. Yeah.
Every year?
Yeah. So, do you remember what grade you gave us last year?
I think I gave you an A- last year.
Yeah. Okay. Where are we at?
I would say from a financial and control perspective, I'd give you an A. I mean, you've grown your fund balance, so.
I don't think Mr. Warren ever got an A.
That's our first A ever.
No, man.
He's got a B+.
Yeah. I thought it was kind of A- to B+ last year. I kind of remembered. Oh. Well, let's keep him on his A. We don't want him to. Yeah. Since Mr. Warren never got an A, I think he got B's. Okay, Mr. Como.
In all sincerity, this is we're dependent upon our auditors. This is the most important responsibility we have as a board, is to make sure that our financials are being represented properly. We need to hire the people to dig in and make that assessment for us. And I know it doesn't make for great late night reading, but it's some of the most important things that we do. And this is as good of a report as I've ever seen, and I've been on the board for, my 17th year, I think, something like that. So, like you had mentioned, hats off to this financial team in front of us.
Okay, well, with those blazing wonderful comments, I think we'll thank you for your service on this matter and appreciate another good report. Look forward to seeing you next year. Okay.
Thanks, Dave.
Now we're off to discussion items. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Tax increment district.
Kevin is here from the city to talk about, actually, Mr. Edlin touched on this topic during citizens' comments about a proposed amendment to TIF 14, which calls for the expansion of it. And I'll turn it over. Oh, sure. Yeah, can you power up that? Jess, can you sign in maybe into that?
Make sure you have the microphone, the mobile microphone if you're here.
Yeah, is it connected? Yeah, if you can say, I forgot we had. Gotcha. Unless you connect remotely. Should we use, can we use Apple TV? Yeah, you can use my. I saw Richard.
You didn't know you had to be an AV guy too, did you, Kevin?
So we got to make sure you're speaking to the microphone and all that stuff.
Yeah. And don't yell out your password, Darren. There was truth. There's been truth to that over the years, and not the first. Yep. We're in. Good. We're in.
Thank you, Chairman.
Our guy will tell us it's on. Go ahead.
Check.
We're all set, he says.
All right. Thank you, Chairman O'Brien and the members of the committee. I'm Kevin Lehner, the City Administrator for the City of Waukesha. I must apologize if my voice starts to go. I've been fighting a little bit of an ailment over the weekend, and it's not completely gone yet. And the first thing that goes is my voice. So I'll do my best to project as much as possible during the course of the discussion. I'm talking to you today about the TID 14 extension and redevelopment plan that's being proposed by the city. And I'm just going to start briefly and talk a little bit about TIF. As the most folks on this board know, the basis of TIF is to have all the tax density benefit from new development over time. And the TIF districts works is essentially there's an area that seeks to have development or redevelopment. The base value is set, and all the tax entities receive the taxes off that base value for the entire life of the TIF. And through public investment, increased assessed value occurs from that development. And at the end of the life, the TIF is closed and all the new value goes back to the taxing entities. That's the basic premise of any sort of TIF district. In Wisconsin, those districts can last under state statutes anywhere from 23 to 27 years, depending upon what kind of TIF you create. Yes, sir.
Before you move on that slide, because I'm still learning a little bit about TIFs and TIDs relative to government bodies. Is this the normal way? You normally have a set period, and then at the end of that set period is when you do the financial closure of the fund. You don't normally close it early or late.
Correct. Well, it all depends on what your goals are in each TIF, and each TIF is unique. And so if the investment is paid off earlier, then you would close it earlier, or if it takes a longer period of time to pay off those investments, you would leave it open as long as you needed to. And so one of the things that's probably the most difficult for cities is redevelopment TIFs. Redevelopment, which is the city of Waukesha is going to have to do a lot more of in future years, are by their nature very difficult because you're having to acquire properties, tear them down, sometimes do some environmental remediation, and then promote new development. Well, that takes time and probably more significant public investment than, for example, what you would call a greenfield development, essentially a farm field that somebody wants to develop. It has several acres, and a very simple sort of application of TIF is to TIF the quote, farm field or vacant field, put in public infrastructure. The new development comes very quickly and it pays off those bonds. So each TIF has a unique set of circumstances under which they're created, and there's a statutory life. So the statutory life depends on which kind you create, and the maximum number of years are set by state statute, depending upon which kind you create. So just real briefly, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the partnership that the city has had with the other taxing partners over the last several years. We have closed over our lifetime 12 districts, 7 industrial and 5 redevelopment TIFs that have generated $298 million in tax base. Among those projects that you have partnered with us on in creating new value is the expansion of GE, the Life Care Hospital, 4 new industrial parks in the city, new public infrastructure throughout the city, the Riverwalk projects, and redevelopment projects in our downtown. So we have had a successful partnership with all our taxing entities in applying this economic development tool for the city. We currently have 13 open districts, 5 redevelopment, 6 industrial, 1 environmental, and 1 mixed-use district. And to date, those districts have generated $234 million. And this is a little bit dated, it's actually a little bit behind. So it's even more than that now. And at the end of their their life, they're expected to generate $276 million in new value. Yes, sir.
There was a comment made tonight about a prior TIF that was associated with the Clark Hotel. Are
Yeah.
you familiar with that TIF?
I'm familiar with that TIF. I can't speak to his claim necessarily.
Right, but I guess the question I have, was it just the Clark Hotel or was it an expanded area beyond the Clark Hotel?
It was an expanded area beyond the Clark Hotel, encompassing much of our downtown.
Okay, so when you look beyond the Clark Hotel, there's been significant economic growth downtown.
All around
which
that area.
I'm pretty sure wouldn't have happened if the Clark Hotel continued to be a condemned building of that size and magnitude. on Main
Correct,
Street.
right. Yeah, that actually, despite the challenges that were created around that time, and I wasn't here at that time, but that was a precursor to significant investment in our downtown. And so, though that investment did pay off for the city, and the other development around it has occurred, and there's additional development coming on because of that initial development.
So just because something might not have been as you thought it'd be as a specific site,
Correct.
everything that happened around that, I've heard from all the businesses downtown that they wouldn't be here if it wasn't for.
Correct. That was a significant investment by the city and obviously all the taxing entities to encourage redevelopment, and that's a classic use of a redevelopment type of TIF. So at the end, conservatively, there's going to be $575 million in tax base generated at the completion of all the current construction projects, and those are only things that are on the books today, or 10% of the city's overall tax base, generating $12.4 million in revenue. As we talked a little bit about the life of the TIF, statutorily, you can keep them open between 23 and 27 years, and there are some provisions for extensions as well. But our average life in the city has been 15.7 years. And so we haven't made it a practice to extend TIF districts along. We've made it a practice through our partnership with all the entities to close our districts when they accomplishes the purposes for which they were created. And so we've had a very good track record in that regard. What we're talking about tonight is the extension of TIF 14. And so on the left-hand side, the red and the gray that's hash marked is the current boundary of the TID 14, which, as everybody collectively knows today, is the shops at Fox River. We are proposing to extend the boundary to include industrial, commercial, mixed use, and residential property within the district. That is the proposed project plan amendment, as it were, that's being proposed to the Joint Review Board. And so what we see is a lot of development potential within that area. And what we would call it, and I'll refer to this later, is kind of the hole in the donut. We've partnered with the city and the county and the technical college to do a great redevelopment on an old industrial site that folks who have been here much longer than I have been can remember, to take down an old factory and have what we have there today on one side of Sunset. And on the other side of Sunset, we've partnered to do redevelopment work around a closed Kmart and a new Meijer, and additional development, retail and commercial development in that area, and as well as planned residential development going in around that area. So we've had success along this corridor, and this is kind of a hole in the donut of very underutilized property. Among the hallmarks of the proposal is a sports facility, which includes a baseball stadium, as well as additional soccer facilities with full artificial turf that extend in the area which we know as Mendiola Park, where soccer has traditionally been played. The reality of it is that it's an old dump site. And this is basically turning a virtually unusable piece of property into something into productive use to benefit the entire community. And that's kind of one of the hallmarks of the proposal. I'm sure you all have seen this area, but just as a reminder, we have, and this is no disrespect to anybody who may own a business or putting themselves to productive use within this area, but the property along Sunset and West and in the industrial park is currently underdeveloped in terms of it's not returning the possible higher and best use of tax value or taxable property within this area. And so this is an area along Sunset. And so there are a variety of underdeveloped uses or vacant properties within this area, including along Sunset and along West, a variety of industrial properties that are underutilized or vacant, or just have lower economic value or taxable value to the combined taxing entities. Additionally, we have available property within industrial areas, which we would like to incent to more development in this area. So this is over along Progress. So there's a variety of tracts of land that are available for expansion or for new industrial development as well. We expect in the short period of time that we'd extend TIF 14 to generate $12 million in value and more value after the TIF closure. The conservative estimate of value is just that, it's conservative, and it is reflective of the fact that we're dealing with a relatively short period of time. We would seek to accomplish the redevelopment of underdeveloped industrial, commercial, and residential properties. As I stated, try to fill the donut hole. We'd like to see a productive reuse of a previous landfill site, which we think is exciting. That would be a benefit to the city and really one of the only things that you could do on a site like that. And also have a signature regional tourism facility, which we think is a huge benefit to the local economy. And also is a great public-private partnership between the city, the school district, and Carroll University, as well as private partners. In terms of the regional sports facility, Carroll University, under the proposal, Waukesha North and Waukesha South High School would be able to use the baseball stadium to be built there, as well as the associated other facilities around it. And Waukesha Parks, Recreation, and Forestry would control the soccer facility and host city-sponsored programming, as well as soccer tournaments. We partner with Big Top Baseball, who's an entity that owns several sports teams, in particular Northwoods League's baseball teams, that would host 40 baseball games per year in the Northwoods League. And they would also host soccer games of a minor league or a collegiate soccer league at the facility. And so the group that we are working with, that the city is seeking to partner with, is a group that currently owns 5 teams, 5 very successful teams. They own the Madison Mallards, the Kenosha Kingfish, the Wisconsin Rapids Rafters, the Green Bay Bullfrogs, and the North Shore Chinooks. And so they have a long track record of success in this area. They also have been making inroads with Major League Soccer, and they most recently announced an affiliation with the Major League Soccer franchise out of Minneapolis for a minor league soccer team in Madison. And so the folks that we have partnered with on this project are very experienced, have a long track record of success, have a long track record of public-private partnerships. And so we think that they're a good partner in this project. As I stated, we're seeking to amend the boundary of TIF 14 to make approximately $12 million of improvements to this area. We would do extensive amounts of infrastructure improvements, as well as commit city general fund dollars to do the improvements and fund that through our TIF increment. The total project will be paid in 7 years, in part through the TIF increment, in part through city general fund dollars. We have had great success with this district. There's no doubt about it. When we started it, it was $9.8 million. Through the public investment, we've been able to attract $90.5 million in value. We think this is a great investment in terms of its short payoff, its community benefit, and additional redevelopment in the area. It's really a catalyst type of project for this area, similar to the investment that our partners made when we started doing the Riverwalk. I think it makes the investment encourage new commercial and residential development, and as I stated, creates a long-lasting asset that can use to benefit the entire community. Just briefly, youth sports is a huge and growing industry. Currently, it's estimated that it's about a $15 billion a year industry, and 53 million athletes. And if anybody has kids, you know that you're pushed to this extreme on occasion. 53 million athletes travel to participate in youth sporting events. And travel expenses only, youth athletes and their families generate $7 billion a year in the U.S. Many communities are moving to implement these sorts of youth complexes that we're proposing. And a few examples of those that have been successful include Blaine, Minnesota, Kingsport, Tennessee, Branson, Missouri, and Carmel, Indiana. They range in size and in scope. Some of them are tremendously huge, and some of them are smaller. We believe that we would have a very attractive regional facility that would attract a variety of youth sports and other events to our region, and our city in particular. Just real briefly, a quick sketch of some economic activity generated by the potential development. So a youth soccer tournament, according to the folks who run them, Waukesha SC, can generate 5,000 spectators per day. The average spending for a daytime visitor to a community, according to the Waukesha Pewaukee Visitors Bureau, and that's based upon some data that was generated by the State Tourism Bureau, is about $58 per day. And so if you host 10 tournaments, you're generating about $5.8 million a year in economic activity for your community. And that's folks coming, buying a burger before a soccer tournament. If you're at a soccer tournament, there's lots of time to kill. You go get some ice cream, You fill up your car with gas. If you stay overnight, then you're staying in a hotel. That's not included in this. This is only a daytime visitor calculation. For Northwoods League Baseball, out-of-town visitors, if we estimate 1,000 in a 2,500 seat stadium, again, $58 a day. They host 36 games a year. That's about $2 million in economic activity generated for our local businesses as a result of this facility. Just real briefly, we think that affiliating ourselves with the Northwoods League is a huge benefit. It's one of the most successful leagues in the country. When it comes to what you would call minor league or collegiate league baseball is really what it is. They have 5 of the top 10 franchises in the nation and 3 of the top 5 in attendance. As I mentioned, the group that we're working with owns 5 Northwood Leagues franchises, including the Mouse and Mallards, who lead the nation in attendance. And their others do very well, do very good as well. So from a city's perspective, we obviously see lots of benefits that we create a multi-use facility for athletic and community events. We would develop a community asset for the benefit of our community and our Parks and Recreation programming, attract visitors to support our local businesses, which we think is very important, to create a regional tourism facility, and to provide non-tax revenue to our park system on a long-term basis. From a school district perspective, you'd be able to take advantage of a state-of-the-art facility for Waukesha North and Waukesha South High School for their baseball programs. And there is, as you guys know, everything has moved to spring baseball, so there's a huge advantage to having an artificial turf, which is basically playable in any weather unless it's lightning, from what I understand. That you'd also be able to use the facility for other uses that require turf, such as soccer, lacrosse, football, or other sports activities I couldn't possibly think of. Maybe the marching band at North would be able to utilize it, I don't know. Because I know that there is obviously a lot of demand on your facilities over at the school district. We would be able to continue our redevelopment efforts within the district to attract young families. We are trying to do things from a city's perspective to think about the future of our community, and that future includes extensive redevelopment efforts and doing things that make our community attractive to young families to continue to grow our population and our tax base and those sorts of things. We'd grow tax base in an area that otherwise remain undeveloped. And as a result of the current plans, we estimate that at the end of the district, we'd see about a $1.2 million in excess revenue that would go back to the district. That's an estimate. We don't know that as an absolute fact, but the result is that when everything is paid off, we'd have some excess revenue, and in the state law, you distribute those funds to all the taxing entities at the end, and that's what we are currently estimating that would be. So, really what we're asking from the school district is to continue those partnerships, the successful partnerships that we've had around development. And for you, there is really not a substantial risk. If there's any shortfall under state law, the city takes on those burdens. We're the ones that have to fill any sort of debts, or if there's any project costs that aren't covered by any sort of new development, the city has to cover those costs. That's the risk that the city takes. Again, I would just again ask for your support, and I'd be open to any questions that you may have.
So when I think of TIFs relative to the city or, anyone that School District Waukesha associates for, I normally don't try to decide whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to have a TIF, right? I don't think that as school board members that's really in our bailiwick. I look at it strictly as a financial situation for the district. So looking at it more, and don't get me wrong, I just don't want to express an opinion on this, even though whether I think it's a good idea or not, whether I like it or not, it's not really part of what I would use to advise how we'd like to go on this. My question is, why do we feel expanding this TIF is a good idea versus creating a TIF that's directed, a new TIF that's directed specifically at the redevelopment of that corridor? You know, I ride my bike down that corridor all the time. I do business with Daryl's Transmission. I know his old shop was sinking into the ground because it was a landfill, which is something you guys will have to deal with if you decide to build on this site. So it is an area that's ripe for development, and I also have always been sunset up and down. I know there's a hole there, and I know we have from our own economic, it's one of our weaker economic areas in the district. So it seems to me that a TIF that doesn't include expanding the existing one or would be justifiable without taking from the TIF that we have that's actually generating revenue above and beyond. If we don't close it out, that revenue that continues to build on that successful TIF becomes a cash disbursement to the school district.
Yeah, so a couple of things there. So let me address the issue of the revenue continuing to build. If we don't expand the district, we wouldn't be in a position to, nor would we desire to, build a big cash balance in the TIS district. We would seek to close that out relatively quickly, and the funds would not generate in that district as a cash balance. There wouldn't be like a big potential balloon payment or payout. It wouldn't benefit anybody, because we, from the city perspective in particular, and I would assume the county perspective as well, is that we'd like to see that value returned to the rolls. If we're not going to use it, the benefit of the other redevelopment. So to your point of the,
well, let me address that.
Sure.
I'm not sure that's, I mean, you could do that. I'm not sure, you seem to be like you're trying to hit a home run when maybe a single might work better. I mean, if you guys would allow that TIF to continue to expand and build a cash balance, those cash surplus funds, as per your first chart, get distributed back to the taxing entities.
right.
So you would get your share, the county would get their share, we'd get our share.
Right.
Why not allow it to continue to build a cash value and then apply that cash value to paying down or helping to adjust your new TIF for the new development?
I think that our funding formulas are different. So we would benefit more by adding back to our levy than we would by letting it continue to grow.
Yes, you would, but the problem is that we don't benefit at all then.
Right.
And as a school district, which covers all of Waukesha, the city of Waukesha, it seems that that should be a consideration to the city as well. It shouldn't be, look, we really want this new TIF, and you guys should just agree to do this, when we're getting pushback from taxpayers as well about this. But I'm not trying to make a judgment about it.
Right.
I'm looking at what's the best financial picture for the district.
Right.
And in essence, you can win, the county can win. Yes, they'd win more because we'd get nothing, right, by adding it back to the tax base. The school district gets $0 from that.
From a levy perspective.
We get nothing.
Right.
Right?
From the levy perspective.
Because we're revenue limited in dollars, not by the levy.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So when you say you would come out better if you added it back to the tax base, maybe, but you wouldn't have it then to use to help offset the cost of this new TIF. Mr. Como.
Yeah, so just to help my fellow board members here, if we were to, or anytime a TIF closes, there's two things that happen. You close the TIF. If there's any extra monies left over, those get defeased out to the taxing entities at whatever portion you're at. And we're at like 39%, is it?
Just sub 40, I forget the specific
40%, somewhere in there. So that money that gets defeased to us actually is counted outside the revenue caps, which we don't get to count very much money outside of the revenue caps. This is just one of those very rare instances where that occurs. So just as an example, to put it in perspective for you too, if this was to defease at the end of 2019, roughly those monies that would come back to us roughly would be a little over $900,000. So that would be monies we get back. We could put that towards capital improvements. I mean, whatever we want to put that towards. We could also lower the tax levy with that. So that's actually the second thing that comes back to us. So we get the defeasance money that's outside the revenue cap. The second thing that happens is we don't get to increase our levy like the city does, or it helps them from a revenue perspective. So our revenue doesn't increase, but what happens is our mill rate goes down because we're adding those, as we add the property back from the tax rolls, that spreads it out across the district wider, and so that drives the mill rate down. So there's two things that happen when a TIF closes for us. The defeasance money comes back to us, and that's outside the revenue cap, and then our mill rate goes down because we have all that property coming back on the tax rolls. Does that make sense? That those are the two things that happen?
Let's make sure that we don't confuse the mill rate with being lower taxes. I mean,
Right.
the mill rate's the mill rate. It's based on property value.
Right.
Now, before we go on, you mentioned about the soccer field and the tournaments. Well, we have tournaments now on our soccer fields. You know, we have a major tournament twice a year through SC Waukesha. It attracts people from all over. So there's already an economic impact from that. The difference is we're not even generating any revenue from that. It's all going to SC Waukesha, okay? We have artificial turf fields, not baseball artificial turf, but we have artificial turf fields that will need to be replaced someday with no funds allocated to replace those fields. So when we look at 900,000 or 1.8 million or 2.5 million, if that was to come out of a surplus from a TID district, we'd probably put that into a fund that would allow us to maintain our facilities and do replacement and upgrades of things like fields. Right. So it's a little hard for us to say we want to give up money, right? There's nothing in it for the school district of Waukesha to say, here, take our money.
In what way? So you're saying that, so the 1.2 million that I mentioned, that is funds that you would get back at the end of the defeasement period.
Did you bring a defeasement schedule? And I know it's just a projection, but just to put it in perspective, if we were to close, and we had some rough numbers for 2019 that was tossed out at our last joint review board.
Do you? Yeah. Yeah, it's if you'd hand it to Mr. Como, he's probably seen it before. And just so the audience knows that we have one vote out of, I think, 5.
Yeah.
And Mr. Como's our representative on the TIP board, so he's the most versed in this topic.
So, and these are just numbers that, so Norm Cummings, he's the representative from the county side of things. And these are just the numbers that we're looking at for 2019. If we were to close TIF 14 at the end of next year, there would be $2.5 million left. and that would get distributed between the city, school, and county. For us, it would be closer to $1 million. I was on the low side. $980,236 is a projection. Did you go beyond that? Did you generate a 2022 projection, Kevin? That
I don't know that I have that exactly as
I know
norm.
we've been trying to figure out if we could get that. Or Rich, did you get a chance to talk with Ellers on that?
I guess it confuses me because your first side said you normally go to the end, but now you're talking about cutting it off early because you could. I mean, obviously, but it's not required, right? It could go to the end.
Yeah, it can go to the end. I mean,
And for our perspective, we want it to go to the end. Maybe from the county and the city's perspective.
yeah,
Not
and it
necessarily.
wouldn't be beneficial for anybody for it to go to the end. I mean, we would have, you wouldn't want us to build a huge cash balance with no use for it, and the county certainly wouldn't, and the city wouldn't have that at all.
But you always have a use for a cash balance.
But you wouldn't, there's no projects going on in the district. So if there's no projects going on in the district, then we would not
Yeah,
want.
but we're debating something that's not really, I mean,
Yeah.
the point is, there would be a cash balance that would build if you let it grow out.
Right, but
Okay, that's all I want to know.
But the reality is, we never do that.
Well, then
Because-
you don't care about the school district,
No,
you care
it's
about.
It's not about this. It's not about caring about the school district. It's about the purposes of the school district of a TIF district is to create taxable value to the benefit of all the taxing bodies, including the school district and the city. It's not about creating a cash balance to distribute to other entities. All that is really is how the mathematics work when you close a district. When your expenses are paid and your revenues are come in, sometimes you have leftover funds, and really the goal for most is to try to make that zero, because you don't want to overtax folks for things that aren't happening. So it's not that I don't care. That's not the point. Is that the purposes of a TIF district is to generate economic value and then close to the benefit of all the taxpayers, because that new value goes back on the rolls, and we've done that to the tune
Mr.
of
Coleman?
$300 million.
And I think that's, if I was to reflect upon the Joint Review Board comments, because we had our first meeting, and actually there was a meeting prior to this about a year or so ago, where we talked about taking monies from successful TIFs and using those monies to close down a number of TIFs that weren't successful. That was about a year and a half ago, Kevin, when we had that discussion, I think. What we discovered during that discussion is the way we're funded, the way our revenue caps work, is just very different from how it works for the city. And that's kind of at the center of this discussion is as these guys want to move forward with this development, it's not necessarily in our best interest from a financial perspective to do so, because we can bring our mill rate down. If this was to close into fees, and I know we can't just magically wave a wand and say, let's close this. I know the county has encouraged us to close this. I think I'm leaning towards, not I think, but I believe closing this district would be of more benefit to us now. It could be greater in the future, depends on the projections, depends upon decisions that the city makes in terms of how they, potential projects that they might want to continue to do, because they can, as long as the district is open and there are areas to build, they can continue to have projects. They don't have any lined up for the district right now, though, Kevin, right? As is?
Correct.
None right now. So from my perspective and a school district perspective, you are correct, Mr. O'Brien, in terms of from a benefit, from a financial perspective, it would be in our best interest to see this perhaps generate, it could potentially generate some more funds for us if it's defeased a few years out from now. But then again, that's going to be a projection. Right now, if we were to defease it in a year, this is what we'd be giving up. It could potentially be more, could be potentially less as time goes on. We don't know that. But what I do believe is if we were to amend this as it's being proposed, that it really isn't in the best interest of the school district. I'd rather see this close sooner than later. We had a projection to the 2022 timeframe as a potential closing. I don't really know what the city's intentions are, Kevin. And as you know, you guys do have quite a bit of say in terms of whether that money gets spent or not. That would be available for defeasing.
Bottom line is, I think you told me as well, Joe, it's not going to be our decision when they close this TIF. It will be the city's decision, I believe, right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay. So whether it stays open or whether it stays closed, if it doesn't get expanded, is the city's decision. And we do know that at this point, there's between $900,000 and $1.2 million of cash that would come to the district if it was closed at the end of 2019. Is that correct?
It's about 900,000 at 2019. It's about, our estimate's about 1.2 million if we go to the end of the district as our proposal.
All 27
So
years.
you would be additional funds for the school district if you agreed with our proposal.
So between 900,000 now or 1.2 million tomorrow, it's a $300,000 delta, but nevertheless, it's real money to us. So it's kind of like, I can understand why you want to do the development. I can understand why that would be good for the city of Waukesha. At the same time, you're asking us to take money out of our pockets, because right now they'd be in our pocket, and hand it over to this new development.
It's not, it wouldn't be, the statutory life of the district is what was approved in the project plan, which is 2027. So it's not there yet. And it would be a requirement of us to, we would, so it's not with you yet. It's not in your pocket yet. It's on paper. And there are development goals within the existing district that we would continue to try to accomplish, including industrial development, industrial inspection in that area. So again, these things are founded on a partnership of creating new value for the benefit of all the taxpayers across all the entities. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to build on the success of this one to benefit the neighboring property.
So I guess the question I have, if there's other development to be done within the existing TIF, as you're suggesting, as to why you wouldn't close it, you may maybe leave it open because you have other development that's still allowed within
Potential, yeah.
Potential.
And-
Why are you looking to expand it?
To help the other property all around it. And the other thing is,
This
too,
TIF, excuse me, this, if you wanted to just take this project on and the new property, just pretend that this would be a TIF onto its own, it wouldn't stand on its own, you guys. It would not work on its own.
Well, that's not an excuse to expand a TIF. I mean, for me, I got to understand, you're saying that you still have development to do within this TIF that would maybe make you want to keep it open, but now you want to add a whole bunch more development that wouldn't stand on its own. To me, it's like you're robbing Peter to pay Paul.
I think that the way that I would characterize that is we have an opportunity to do something unique for the benefit of the entire community. And we would be able to use our combined success of the TIF district to be able to accomplish that goal. So that's how I would characterize that.
Again, I'm not stating I'm for or against the project.
No, I understand. I understand. I understand where you're coming from. And the other thing the other reason why cities are reluctant to close the TIF, immediately or whenever is because it's the only tool that the cities have. It's the only tool that the legislatures allows us in terms of encouraging economic developments. And so if there are opportunities there, if there are industrial expansions, if there are other opportunities to be created, if that TIF is closed, then those funds, any sort of incentive, infrastructure assistance, anything like that is no longer available. And so the only answer to that would be to recreate a TIF over an area that had already been successful, or some other proposal, which we just don't have those in our toolboxes as Wisconsin communities. The state legislature doesn't afford us those.
So
be clear, who for the sports complex would own the property?
The city would.
So are we concerned that the district would not be able to stand on itself because a large portion of it would not be producing any tax revenue?
There's a portion of it that would not be
A large portion?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
and that's why it wouldn't stand on its own.
The investment of itself, yes.
Right, because,
Yeah.
yeah, so. I
In
mean,
the
isn't-
time frame that we have.
I mean, we create these TIFs so they can basically run themselves, right? That's what,
In terms of,
so you supply themselves with enough cash flow
Correct.
to pay for
Yes.
the improvements. So
yeah.
for me, the problem that I have with it is there's going to be a large portion of it that's not going to generate any sort of taxes at all. We don't create TIFs for that, and I don't think that we should be attaching a piece of property to an existing successful TIF that's not going to generate, that a large portion is not going to generate any tax funding. So that's my point on it.
Thank you. Have you expanded the boundaries of other TIFs before?
The city has changed boundaries on TIFs before, expanded and contracted them. We expanded the boundary of TIF 14 previously to include new areas. Yes.
Besides TIF 14?
Yes, there's been others that we have in the past. I've been with the city for 4 years, and we have a variety of TIFs, but I have not been involved directly in those discussions, but boundaries have been expanded before.
Okay, so is this, help me understand if this is kind of how our vote, if we have any, counts. I mean, not mine specifically, but if we have anything.
We have one vote on the joint review board. Mhm.
So when we had entered into an arrangement for our health facility from the city, the county, and the school district of Waukesha, depending on how much area we had, I believe we had 2 votes, county had 2, city had 1, or something like that, for the percentages that.
Yeah, there's 5 votes on the joint review board, but the clinic has nothing to do with TIF.
I know that. But do you understand what I'm saying about the 3 governmental
Yeah, so
entities, and they're only worried about themselves?
there's 4 entities. Well, yeah, I mean, and the city should, I mean, what the city is doing is what the city believes they should be doing.
Yeah.
So there's 4 entities on the joint review board. There's the school board, or the school district. There's Waukesha County, there's the city, and then WCTC. And then at our very first organizational meeting, we elect a person at large to represent the community. So the first joint review board was held a couple of weeks ago, and that's when we first heard about the project. And per our policy, we're required to bring this information back, if it is in a timely manner, to our school district to review the project with F&F. And that's why we're here tonight, is to give you a feel for what the project is, and for me to garner from our discussion what direction I should take that vote on the behalf of our district.
So when you were speaking about what it would do for the city, like if all of us have a vote in that, how are you, what is your plea to us, or how are you going to tell us that this is good for us when we've just learned that really closing it is? Do you have any, I wrote down your answer, when Mr. O'Brien had asked you, why amend the boundary of TIF 14? Did you say, if they don't expand the district, it's adding back to the levy? Something, it's really helping your levy. But what about us? Do you have an answer that it's going to help us?
Well, the one thing is that it provided a facility that you wouldn't have to maintain for your athletic teams at North and South. I mean, that's a huge benefit to you.
And why just North and South? Why not West?
Because West has a facility.
a field on their campus.
Okay.
North and South currently use Frame Park as their baseball facility. The WIA, as I'm sure you guys know, has moved to spring baseball for all of the state. And so the wear and tear on that facility is going to be quite extensive based upon that use, and there's going to be a need for an upgraded facility for the school district and for everyone who uses that facility, particularly in the spring. And so number one, that would be the one community benefit. The other is the redevelopment of the area, create new value. So we're asking to use an existing asset that we have, that we had a very successful partnership with, to expand the boundary to include new development in the area, which would add additional value to the city, to the city tax rolls and the school district tax rolls, to the benefit of everyone. And we've demonstrated that we've done this successfully multiple times to the tune of more than of $300 million, and we're going to be approximately $575 million, which is not insignificant in terms of the levy and the value to the taxpayer. That new value helps reduce the mill rate and the amount of taxable taxes that the city has to levy, because it's spread over a broader base for the homeowners and existing businesses. So those are the things that are of benefit to the school district.
I wrote down something else you said.
I'm sorry, Karen, just to be clear, lowering the mill rate does not benefit the school district, because
Benefits the constituents, but
the city, the school district entity, but it does benefit the
well,
taxpayers.
we're going
within
to tax a flat amount to the constituents. So the mill rate combined with property value is what the constituents end up paying to us.
Correct.
So as the property value extends, then some constituents will pay less taxes.
Correct. Correct.
But it doesn't benefit the district. I'm sorry, Karen, I just want to make that clear.
Okay.
So actually, what it essentially does is when we take down the mill rate, and we just passed a referendum, right? So there's by taking this $90.5 million and adding it back on to the tax rolls for us, our 40%, that's quite a bit. That's a nice chunk. That basically, doesn't that cut almost the mill rate that we're going to increase for the referendum? That cuts it in half. Close to it.
Or in that
Not really. It's a percentage of the total taxing value of the district.
No, I'm sorry, yeah, because we got to put in the full value
You're using the
amount.
wrong math there, Mr. Como. It's quite a bit.
Full amount.
It's a very minimal impact.
So
yeah, our tax base is, I don't have my budget with me, is
well, it's like 10 billion.
10
isn't it?
just shy of 10
Yep,
billion,
Yep,
so-
yep. No, wrong thinking. You're right. Yep.
That's why I don't want this to be over. I mean, the benefit to the district is basically community. Okay, if it was expanded, it's basically a community benefit. A better community, a better place to live. But really, we try not to get into that, because that's all of our responsibility, the cities, the county, everything like that.
And facilities for your.
And I don't, facilities for the baseball team. I got to turn this back to Ms. Ronachek, because she really had the floor.
Okay.
So
No problem.
A couple things I wrote down. You said if an investment paid off early, you can close it. And then you said you haven't made it a practice to make TIF districts long. When they fulfill their purpose, they're closed.
Correct.
And hasn't this one fulfilled its purpose?
It's fulfilled much of it, yes. I mean, we've developed a lot in that district. It's been very, very successful. It's been very, very successful. And it's been as a result of the work of the city working with the development community to make that happen. But there are other opportunities within the district still. And so there are vacant parcels, there are industrial parcels, there are industrial properties that have expansion plans. And so there are some things left that could be done.
And what you proposed all looks wonderful. Isn't there another way?
There really isn't. I mean, to be very frank with you, there really isn't. It doesn't. The dollars and cents don't work for the city in any other way.
Thank you.
Other questions?
So is this something that you'd put up to a referendum?
For referendum?
Yeah.
That's not typically what we've done for this sort of thing. It hasn't been in something that we've ever entertained. So,
I mean, that's the difference between, we have to put these things up for referendum.
Yep.
If we wanted to build something new,
yeah.
we don't have the ability to create a TIF to build a high school, for instance.
Yeah, and I'm very familiar with that process. Back in Texas, when you do stuff like this, you've got to put it up for what they call a bond election. We did it many times when I was down there, and so it's not a fun process. The informational campaigns are very stressful, as I'm sure Mr. Clark knows, and others.
That keyword informational.
And it was great. It was wonderful to see the community come out and support the district in your recent referendum. As a district resident with 4 students in the district, we were very happy for that.
So if you didn't do the soccer field, because we have soccer fields of turf, and we have tournaments now, I'm not so sure we need another artificial turf soccer field. I mean,
yeah, this is really a different kind of facility in terms of having that volume all in one place. It would be very beneficial from a regional. It would attract. There's no other facilities like it. There's very few that compare to it within the state or even within the region.
any other questions on that?
I didn't know, Darren, if you wanted to. I mean, you've been looking at this with me, and, we've had several discussions. Are there any facts or points that you feel, we haven't discussed or would like to add into the mix here?
Sure. I think you've hit on it, but just to kind of summarize it, when the interesting part of this conversation with the county and the city and the Tech College is learning that we all have different financing goals and opportunities. So for us, it's really, again, strictly looking at it from a financial benefit of the district. It's the timing of that defeasance and the amount of it. That's, there's the global good of the community, and everyone has a different measure of what the benefit would be for the city. But really, it's the defeasance part of it from a financial only standpoint is the part that we need to take into the strongest consideration.
So typically, and maybe Mr. Como can correct me if I'm wrong, we don't normally take a motion or action directing.
Correct. Yeah.
What we generally do is the person who represents us on the TIF board, he wants to make sure this gets back before our committee and he gets feedback from us on the matter. And then he takes that feedback and weighs it into his decision on how he will vote as our representative on the district. Because we're only one of 5, we generally have never had a situation where there is maybe a split vote. This happens to be one of those times, possibly, but nevertheless, at the end of the day, we'll provide our feedback to Mr. Como, and then he'll make his final decision.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.
Okay. Well, thank you, too, for coming in. It was a nice presentation. Lost my agenda. Now we're going on to the facility use guidelines. And before we get into facility use guidelines, I just want to state that it's okay to ask broader questions as long as it doesn't interfere with stuff that we'd be directly discussing in closed session. So if you have a question relative to scheduling for SC Waukesha, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with asking those questions. It's the only way to get that information in front of the board right now, by asking these types of questions, and you shouldn't have a problem with asking questions related to SC Waukesha as long as it doesn't interfere with what guidance we would normally get in closed session.
I don't know if there's questions. I have Brian and Todd, the ADs at North and South. Kyle couldn't be here tonight. West has a 8th grade something or other he had to present at, so open house. I think if you brought him up here, because
I think there are a lot of questions about
I thought there
scheduling.
might be, so if you guys can come up to,
I hear Brian's name a lot, so it's,
no, they're good guys. Hey, Jess, you want to grab my computer? Grab my computer, will you? No, just so I don't forget it in here.
and as a matter of context, Mr. Clark, we received examples of other facility use policies and guidelines. One of them was McWanago, which I assume you might have had some role in creating at the time. Somewhat similar to ours, but more categories, more
Customized.
I think more distinction than ours has. Ours is not maybe as specific as the McWanago policy is. So, I mean, so there are other policies, but we're here to discuss what we do now, I guess, and how it all works out.
Sure, and I know there's been a lot of attention to facility use over the last few months, but this was a conversation we had planned on rolling out in early 19 about the guidelines to support the new board policy. If you remember, we switched to Neola. I forget exactly when that transition happened now, but that actually I have the current board policy related to facility use on the backside of the executive summary, and part of that policy states that the superintendent or designee will provide or develop administrative guidelines. So we're here to talk about generically how facility use will unfold. And one thing that the guidelines that start on page 3, what I hope to accomplish, and this is something that McWanago at least a few years ago still had, I don't know if they've made any changes or not, but what you wanted to do in these guidelines is not only outline how the administration will go about administering requests, but it also lays out the expectations of the district for the users. A lot of times the policies are just the rental part of it. So there is different sections in here. I won't bore you and read through every single word of it, but it does, it starts off by laying out the process. And we have a new software package that, though it's gotten off to a rough start, but it also helped us discover a few things. I think it's a good tool in the long run. The next section of the guidelines is the responsibility of users or clients. We get into supervision, whether it's adult supervision. The board always has the authority under the guidelines to mandate, and I think we've moved that direction from for liability purposes and other reasons, that custodial staff be present whenever possible, and in the vast majority of cases. So adult supervisors still play a role in that we expect someone who is renting or utilizing our facilities to provide appropriate supervision to their participants, the students. We also touch on administrative responsibilities. We touch on the group classifications, which have not changed. We followed the format, which was the groups that the districts had. I don't know how far back your policy goes, or our policy, in terms of those groups, but we made no major, or I don't think any changes to those groups. And then the rest of it's just kind of some general regulations, you know, things, facility use agreements are non-transferable, so one group can't rent it and then give it to whoever. There's no authority to do so. One thing that kind of gets lost, and one thing that we're struggling with, in L, all rentals are contingent upon availability of district personnel. Our staff are getting stretched thinner and thinner because we're trying to max out the possible utilization of our facilities. I'm not saying we can't staff that, but it is something that we're knocking around some solutions to how can we cover, and essentially it's a weekend issue. It's not during the week. How do you staff a tournament that starts at 8 a.m. and goes till 8 at night or 10? I know those can run a long time. Who wants to do that Saturday and Sunday? So we're looking at some staffing, different approaches to that to try to provide some coverage. So those types of regulations or guidelines are also provided. So I think it's a pretty comprehensive guideline document. It looks very similar to Probably looks very similar to McGuanago's, but I think it has a lot of good information, both for the user and for the district itself. On page 7, we do require a certificate of insurance from groups, and these are the insurance limits that have been recommended. And I don't think there's any changes here, Jess, is that not? Yeah, not since. And then we get into the fee schedule itself. Again, policy calls for that to be created as well. One fee that we have created is a cancellation policy. We had a lot of groups, especially when we're bringing in staff, not a lot. It happened on a pretty steady consistency where groups would reserve something, we'd staff it, and no one would show. So we're actually providing incentive. The fee's waived if they provide notice. That way we can back off the staffing and everything goes smoothly. But that is something new that we think is important and does serve a purpose for the district. Again, on page 9 is the fee structure, and this is a document that's been around. One thing, and I do believe and agree needed to be adjusted was the custodial charges that that have been in policy going back a significant amount of time. I don't know if it's been a decade or 12 or whatever number of years, but we are looking to reduce the custodial charge from $50 on Saturday and $65 on Sunday to $30 on Saturday and $40 on Sunday. This is a rate that was, as far as we can tell, is as low as it was in 95 and 96 fiscal years. So we would recommend that change. Again, if you remember the compensation for custodial staff, there's a grandfathered tier of pay, and then there's new hires essentially. It can be either one of those people working that weekend, so we kind of hit what we thought was a blended number but it's a significant drop, $20 on Saturday and $25 on Sunday. The other fee that we've been knocking around is the weekend surcharge, and this is trying to factor in when a group rents a field house from, I'll just say 1 to 4, whatever time slot you want. The cleanup for a field house is well beyond that. It's a huge facility, and just our gyms in general. But this would only be included in a bill. There is no fees during, and I'm just talking for youth groups, there is no charges unless there's even then, there's no building rental, there's no custodial charge during the week whatsoever because we have second shift at our building, so it's covered. We have staffing right now, Saturday up till 1 o'clock, so there is no custodial charges up to that point. Where the surge charge comes in is after that period of time, and that would be $50 per usage per day. So now if we change our staffing, or maybe we run scheduled staffing longer than Saturday, this would flex with whatever staffing model we end up. And again, we're still knocking around some ideas on that.
So I think you're correct in that our policy is similar to what I've seen in McWanago and the other ones that I've seen. The problem is we haven't always referred to our policy when we go to manage our facility usage. And by that I would say when the reason there's categories is because these different groups of people should be treated differently, right?
At some point, a board agreed with that, and I think a lot of boards, I've been to a few districts now, there's a shared vision of that, I think.
So when you go from being a nonprofit to a for-profit, you move categories per our policy.
Yeah, whenever the request is made.
Yeah.
Where are you in that snapshot of time?
If you change your status, it doesn't mean that you're locked in for life as a nonprofit when you become a for-profit.
There's no lifetime provision to being in a group.
Right. So our policy says, it says for-profit, you're in group 4. That's what our policy says. Have these poor athletic directors sitting there and they're just listening to us talk back and forth.
They live it.
Does anyone have, I have some questions on scheduling, but I want to let I try not to be the only board member talking.
So if, I'll go ahead, if you have a fee.
comment I have is I don't really have a problem with the fees as long as we are covering our costs. I mean, what does a janitor make on Sunday? Is that
Yeah,
double?
that's a tricky question.
Right.
The other question, I want to say time and a half, around $40, $35 an hour on a Sunday. But the other question we often get is, well, what if you have 4 groups in the field house?
Right.
And quite honestly, we're trying to build a fee structure that'll fit into our school and work and function in there. So when the request is made, we can provide essentially the bill on the front end of the transaction rather than trying to gather timesheets out of a district with 1,600 employees. So we're trying to make that work. But I think the custodial time we have covered. And part of the surcharge, the theory behind it, also is when you have those large tournaments, it doesn't seem like a lot of money, but it's the use of the bathrooms, it's the facility usage, and we're trying to capture that within that. So I think we're coming much closer, even though these fees are lower than what they have been, of actually addressing and covering our costs. The other thing that we'll do better as a district, it's one thing to have a fee schedule, but if you don't have a good invoicing system,
Right. Yep.
you could have some of these fees be $1 million, and if you never bill it accurately,
You'll get paid.
So I think our school and the work my staff's doing will provide more clarity and accuracy in the invoicing.
So the other question I have about the fees, say that we have to, say the custodian has to stay 2 hours after to clean up. Because I've been to those events at South in the field house and it can get messy. Or even at the stadiums. Do we charge that out at the $30 and $40 an hour? Or do we just charge the amount of time that the event goes on? So say the event is, like you said, 8 hours, but our janitor there, our custodian is there for 10. Yeah, that's a problem for me.
I think you must speak in your mic and turn on just.
We're only
I got you. I heard you. That would be a problem for me as well, because then we're not covering our costs.
well, that's where the weekend surcharge is supposed to
Well,
help us.
It would help, but I
Cover.
just want to make sure our costs are covered, especially on our employees.
Then again, you've got a custodial, they're 10 hours, they may have 2 hours of setup, and then there's 6, 7 hours of dead time where they aren't really,
Yeah, I wonder if it's really
Needed.
dead time, though. I've been to these
well,
things.
but I
and
mean,
don't know if there's a lot
they're
of
just
dead
not,
time.
they may not be.
Yeah, no,
you
I
know,
understand.
And they may even be working in another part of the building for the district, doing district. So, I mean,
Maybe.
I think it's probably a wash in that regard.
You're saying where our costs are being covered.
Yeah, and and as I look at, again, I'll refer to districts that I was in prior, we would have a custodian come in, do the setup, and then there would be someone on call who would get a small stipend, certainly not this particular rate, and then they would come in the last 2 hours for cleanup. And of course, we asked the groups to help clean up too, to help offset the cost as well. So that's, I don't know the feasibility of that, but obviously your on-call custodian would have to be living somewhat in the
Yeah, right.
city,
In the
so
city.
they could get there in 10, 15 minutes. But again, I guess we'd have to have that conversation with the facilities guys, is what happens during, after setup and before they start knocking things down, so.
We've talked also with the weekend surcharge of, and this is just conceptually, and I think what I'm looking to do is have this one in place, learn a little bit. But also, is it better to tie it to the length of an activity? I think you're more apt to have that kind of situation you're talking about with that all-day activity.
Right.
The parents are tired, they've been there all day.
Exactly, yep.
But one other thing.
In itself.
Yes, in South's a frequent
Right.
flyer for
South
big.
is very popular.
It was busy.
Yes, it was very busy.
But the other thing that our school, and Jess, you want to talk about how we can get information on an event, whether it's feedback, I guess.
The custodians do have the ability to send feedback to me on the groups, if a group is there for too long, or if they left it a mess, or maybe if they did a great job. They do have a feedback button.
And so how do we handle that if they get a bad feedback?
We turn it over to the AD and have them.
Oh, then they turn the screws?
Mhm.
So, I mean, when Mr. McCaffrey says he's looking for payment of custodial fees or, recovering those costs, that's not consistent with the administrative guidelines. Administrative guidelines are dependent upon which category you are as to what you're expected to pay.
Not the
Not according to
custodial
this,
fee.
it's for all groups.
The
Where
custodial fee
where
is the
yeah,
same.
where the cost comes in is.
I'm
in
looking
the-
at our guidelines right now. I'm
Oh,
not
okay,
looking at
all
what's
right.
proposed to be changed. I want to follow our guidelines, and I want us to refer to our guidelines. And our guidelines say you will charge fair market value in some cases. At least it'll be taken into consideration.
For Group 4, the policy used to be written that, let's say someone wanted to rent out an auditorium, the policy, there was no amounts in there, and it basically said the CFO would try to determine what the fair market value was. I don't see my role as preferably not calling around all the auditoriums trying to determine that. So that's what I think that fair market value was more of our unique spaces. So what we did is we doubled the fees in Group 4, but I don't think fair market value plays into the lower groups.
But that's not what our administrative guidelines say. If we want to change our administrative guidelines, that's fine, but it's not hard to find a fair market value for use of basic facilities. I mean, it's a per hour rate. We know what other people are charging. We do it for fees. We do it for student fees. We look around at the entire universe of all the school districts to decide how much of our fees are too high or too low. Why wouldn't we do that with using our facilities as well?
I would agree with that for specialty areas. I mean, to me, an auditorium, maybe it is, we get so few requests. But we also wanted to provide some structure that can go into our school for the billing. But the guidelines also say that, if there is a special request, that the superintendent and the CFO have leeway to charge an appropriate amount, or what's the exact, to make determinations within the guideline.
Within the guideline. Yeah, that's why you have different categories of groups, and you treat them differently.
Absolutely.
Because of that. I guess I find it backwards when we have a youth group that's serving our kids, that because they don't want to pay, they are cleaning up to make the facility usable for the next group or for the next day for school. And then another group following after them can be a for-profit group and do what they want to the facility, and we clean it up for free on the school district's dime. I think that's completely opposite of what our policy is, our administrative guidelines are.
I would agree that if we were starting over from scratch and we had all new buildings and we were a new district and we had no other conversations that have ever taken place, that I would agree with that.
Well, we have no other conversations that change that. This is our policy.
Right.
And we're either going to follow it or we're going to write a new one. I mean, we have administrative guidelines. I mean, I don't know how we expect athletic directors to, we're going to second guess everything they do if we don't create guidelines for them.
No, trust me, we're trying to standardize this as much as we possibly can, for our sake as well as the ADs and the user groups.
So now I do have questions for the ADs. I mean, there was a comment made that the facilities that was accessible to our youth groups was cut from 8 to 4 facilities. Is either of you aware of that reduction in access to facilities as a result of the new scheduling software, I think is what caused that? Oh, you need a mic?
I keep looking down at mine every time he does that.
Thank you, Ben.
He's on top.
He's good at that. Can you hear him yet?
The
Tell
lights.
you it's on. Is
Not
it on?
yet.
Tell
Other
us.
way.
Keep testing.
Keep testing.
There you go.
For myself at South, I have very little to do with whatever's happening with our junior programs in the facilities that I don't work in. If you want to ask me questions about the field house and whatever's going on at South, I can answer those for you probably down to the minute if you'd like. But what happens at Whittier and Hatfield and those buildings and who gets them or don't, that's not my bailiwick. I think I heard that word before by Mr. Como or Mr. O'Brien about, it just is not something that I have time to do. And so as we rolled out this new our school system that went to online scheduling, I'm not sure if it's the principal or their secretary or whoever in those buildings set those parameters up with Jess. But again, for the South folks, I heard about it, but I just kept referring them to those schools and those administrators and our new online system. I've certainly been involved in many discussions with Mr. Clark and Jess and his staff over the last 6 months, 7, 8, 9 months about this issue. And so, but I can't give you specifics, I'm sorry.
Similarly to Todd's response, we try very hard to be respectful of the principals at the buildings where sometimes programs that are affiliated or associated with our high school programs are using that we're not directing their spaces or actions. We try to be good partners with them. I think that was the intention of moving to the online system, was the ability to better track usage. And I'm guessing the 4 schools that were lined up are probably the feeder elementaries to North High School, and whenever it was set up, it probably made sense to do that. And it was probably done because there wasn't a total awareness of every single building that every single youth group was using, because we didn't have the online system that allowed for easy data mining of what our usage is. So from the standpoint of where the program recommendation came from, Todd and I have been using our school for a number of years for our contracting for games, scheduling of our high school competitions. At North High School, we've been using it for a number of years as well for our facility scheduling, because our custodians gave us feedback that it was a good system for them to know who was where doing what and when, so they could plan for coverage as best possible to make sure that the schools were ready for our kids coming back the next day or on the Monday after the weekend.
So who does the scheduling for Horning?
The middle school AD would primarily schedule their building or their principal.
Because I think this is what concerns me about the scheduling strategy that we have going forward. I'm hearing no accountability because we got so many different parties that can schedule this, and I won't be able to get answers from any one party out.
No, I think that's the opposite's true. Last year, I couldn't have told you.
Right.
I mean, I'm looking here at Horning, and it's used all day long on weekends from December to March by SC Waukesha. Well, Saturdays, I should say, not all weekend.
Correct. In the past, we did have each building principal in charge of what was going on, which is why we had no idea what was going on across our district. We are now trying to get our ADs involved with the lower levels and help schedule their buildings for them. What we've heard from the middle school athletic directors is they don't have a lot of, I don't want to say they don't care, but they don't have a lot of say in what goes on during the weekends or at night unless it involves their kids, which is their concerts, their parent-teacher conferences. When it comes to scheduling the junior teams, they were all more than willing to let our high school athletic directors take over, so that we can get a framework across the entire district.
And that's, if you look at the back page of your executive summary, this is a kind of a map, and I think the ADs, I forget who's the true founder of this document, but we tried to lay out how we see this going forward. And I think it does fall, when it gets into the junior programs or any youth sport program, in my mind, your high school ADs have to be the first point of contact. My office always is the final approver on facility use, mainly Jess, but so how we see this unfolding is by the end of the school year, and it's broken down by the seasons, okay, that the schools, the elementary schools and the middle schools need to get their stuff in, when are parent conferences, when are all their key, when's the plays or whatever, all the key school activities should be inputted first, okay, per our policy. It's group group 0, I guess, it's the primary group. And then and I'll just, since we've been talking about a lot about winter season with basketball, the level 2 groups, and by June 1st, those submittals would be brought in, and then the ADs would sit down with these groups and go through and schedule this thing.
So, but I don't really like this thing, and I think we've talked about that. This is what you're talking about, this scheduling priority. You're creating a different level of categories relative to scheduling versus our facility use policy, okay? In a way that it's understandable why you're trying to do that. But you're putting what could be for-profit groups ahead of our community groups in terms of priority.
I think maybe I'm reading this wrong, but I think we're giving level 1 folks a shot first, then level 2, then level 3.
Yeah, level 3
and
is
then
level 3
4.
is nonprofit groups, community groups, and you're putting for-profit groups ahead of the community groups.
Well,
No, they'd be level
No,
4. They're actually,
They would go after, they get
It
to
would be
schedule
level 4.
after
That's
the
not what he
level 3.
says. He has an asterisk there, and he says that includes SC Waukesha Express.
I mean, you look
in defense to the document, I don't know the status of SC Waukesha yet, so I've listed it because as of now, they are utilizing our facilities. If we move that and you move that, then obviously we will move it from this column, and we will move it from that. But I don't know what it is, so I didn't know whether to
If it's
include it.
for-profit, is it going to 4? Is it going to priority level 4?
They don't
on
have
this?
any other sort of agreement with the district, I would agree with that. But I don't know the answer to that as of right now.
We need to discuss that.
But we need to be clear that we have a different category of for-profit people.
But this
Absolutely.
document
And we do.
also
level
says
4.
that if we have an agreement with Swim America, they're also a level 2 because they're an SDW-approved
I'm
contract.
just asking for clarification. If it's for-profit, it's level 4.
Unless there's an agreement otherwise, yes.
Well, we don't need any ifs. That's just the way the policy reads, and that's where level 4 should be.
We're talking scheduling timelines, not what we're charging them, though. Scheduling.
no, this
They
has
could
to do
be-
with priority.
Priority.
We could still
Yeah.
schedule them after our own groups, but because we know they're a very high usage group, we might need to plunk in their times and still charge them.
It's not about whether it's SC Waukesha or anybody else. It's about where for-profit groups should be in the priority range.
I would agree, level 4.
I would also take it one step further too, and I'd like to look at in-season sports having some level of priority, because it just, to me, I'll use basketball for an example. That's typically a November 1st through maybe April 1st sport, and to have them ousted by fall or spring sports for practices doesn't make sense either. I mean, it would be the same thing as if we started putting mobile basketball hoops on the fields during football. You know, I mean, so I think there has to be some, and that, again, I'll go back to, I know it sounds like a broken record, but in prior districts that I work, there would be some level of priority for what I would call in-season sports. Now, I don't know, for example, the youth basketball, I don't know the exact start and end date. When my kids were in it, it seemed like it was 12 months a year. It seemed like I was on the road every weekend but so between that period, a normal indoor sport would have some level, if there was a, conflict over one particular building, the in-season may get that sport. The issues I had in other districts were primarily like a fall sport, like volleyball, then wanting to go to a Premier League and trying to oust basketball. So that might be one other thing that we kind of, the direction we would give the ADs to look at that as well, because like I said, there's only one place that basketball can practice, and that's on a basketball court. So the other thought too is maybe we need some more wood courts. I've had at least one group contact me and say, we're spending all this money on rent for I think it's a church. What if we put money towards one of your elementaries putting a wood floor in? It's a thought. It might be something that we look at down the road, which would help alleviate some of these issues as well. So,
Well, I think it's just a matter of trying to be fair, as fair as you can be.
Right.
But let's be a fairness issue for me is the reality is that just kind of like your comment about when is the right time to have access facilities. Just taking soccer in general, for them to be having use of our indoor facilities in the summer probably is no benefit to them.
Right.
They were going to need to want the use of indoor facilities during the winter in order for them to develop the kids. So I'm supportive of having our facilities being used by all parties. It's just how we prioritize it.
I agree. And I
how we
think
prioritize
that-
it and who pays what in what relationship. So.
The other thing that this timeline provides is you have to stagger these requests by those groups, because I might get a request on Monday from a group 3 who wants an answer by Wednesday. I say yes, and then the next day a group 2 person might come in. So you need to bundle these requests, and that's what this this timeline accomplishes, is staggering those requests so you can actually prioritize them. In terms of the in-season and out-of-season, I can't say I disagree with that. But to me, that, again, falls on the ADs. I see the ADs as, if anyone's going to support their junior programs that feed into their high schools, it's going to be them. So, again, I see this all coming back, not to put it all on them, but I just feel that's the best alternative. So that's the draft of the guidelines, and, the tentative timeline that we've established, to let you know kind of where we're at in terms of our thinking.
So I guess the other question I have is, we talked about South doesn't know, North doesn't know, West doesn't know. We have agreements that go across all facilities, let's say with, SC Waukesha is one of those agreements where they have time allowed for them at the soccer fields at West, North, and South. One would assume that would be evenly distributed between the 3 schools, but we have no data on that. And how do we get that data?
I think we have that.
Well,
Now we do.
when am I going to get it? Because I've been asking for it and I haven't gotten it. I mean, over the last few years, do we know how much SC Waukesha has been using?
You talking stadium usage or indoor usage?
Stadium usage.
Do we have the stadiums at our school yet?
Months,
Yes, is your microphone on?
Yes, we do have it in our school, but only for the past couple months.
Yeah, there's no back data in our school for us to pull from.
We've sat down in yearly scheduling sessions with a set number of dates with allocated hours between the 3 high schools, at least, looking at the stadium usage. And for Waukesha North, like I said, we were one of the schools pioneering the use of our school for our facility scheduling. So our hours for SC Waukesha have been, you can pull the data from our school, at least for North. I think one of the pieces that's been, and I think you alluded to it a little bit with the timeline that's been uncomfortable for us as ADs, is that we've been caught between a couple different entities. And I just want to say, I know Vicky was here earlier, but had to leave, and Kelly's here. These are our parents that I see on Friday night at our basketball games. Vicky volunteered Friday night in our concession stand to support our booster club. Kelly and her husband were with their family supporting the basketball team. And in my comment, even that night, was our goal as athletic directors is we want to help as many kids as possible in the city of Waukesha participate in sports and athletics and activities. I think the level of determining, as you said, the guidelines and who falls into where would help us. I think we're also in an uncomfortable spot of feeling as though a legal agreement is something that we really have up to this point been directed to follow, and have been as diligent as possible, like I said, in those yearly meetings with what we were given as our guidelines for it. And like I said, I believe we've been pretty diligent in that, and I think our efforts, Kyle created the first draft of that, and if it needs to be modified, we're certainly okay with that and understand that. But we will continue, whether it's we're told just do it for your high schools and follow this other system, or if other schools want our help, the middle schools and elementary schools, we're certainly willing to help and fold that into our timelines with our scheduling. Like I said, our goal is really pretty simple with helping our kids. So.
Yeah, we touched on it earlier, and I don't know if it was ever truly clarified. Our goal is to get the high school ADs able to be more involved in the scheduling at the lower levels. And our school allows us to do that, and this timeline is the framework that would allow that all to happen. Because at some point, they're going to have a lot of groups wanting time, and they have to balance it in some form or fashion. So they'll need as much data available to them as possible.
As far as field use at South, while we haven't been using our school, at least in my 2+ years here at the district, if you somebody send me a reminder email, with a calculator and a piece of paper, I can come pretty close to hours on our turf, because again, we have a schedule that when I came to work, there's a 3-ring binder with here's the agreement and the times and the dates that at this meeting we have, we set it up and it's there. In terms of indoor use, again, that we also schedule that out, and that's a whole different issue in terms of indoor. And from the high school AD's perspective, and being involved with our junior programs, absolutely we want to be a part of that discussion and part of solving this issue and the opportunity to use space. Having lived in some other previous lives, as Mr. Clark and Superintendent Gray have talked about, this isn't an exclusive issue to Waukesha. This issue is in every school district in the state in terms of use and facility use, because it's a finite thing. And yet the youth world has grown exponentially over years and time. And so school districts are faced with a really tough choice. Do we open the doors 24/7 and let our community use them? I think most of the community would say yes. And then how do you pay for that, though? And that's a very difficult thing. And so charging fees gets to be a very emotional item that I've lived through in some previous lives. There are solutions, as long as people are willing to talk about it. And most definitely setting up tiers is a plus. I want to just say about the calendar that we've produced in terms of the scheduling of this. It absolutely has to be bundled, as Mr. Clark talked about, so that school stuff has to go in first. At the high school level, secondary level, we know that, we do that anyways, we've been doing that for years. Where the issue comes in for the juniors and other outside user groups is, as you work your way down the system, school going in first on a facility use calendar sometimes a year out, so that you can then start giving that space away to other users. That's a little bit foreign as you work your way down into the lower grade levels in elementary division. And that's not to say those people aren't doing it the right way, but that is a new concept for most of our elementaries in this community to have to think about. And for this to be successful, there will be plenty of bumps in the road as we start it, because that will be something new we'll be asking them to do. And the very first time they forget to put something on that calendar and we schedule it out for junior group X, Y, or Z, or community group A, B, or C, and the principal calls and says, we forgot, and they bump someone, you'll hear about it. That won't be a glitch in the system. That'll just be the learning process. So please keep that in mind as you contemplate and talk about how we should do this.
So just for clarity, I have SC Waukesha's entire schedule. I put a bunch of work into getting it down off their website, but from what I was able to find, South High School doesn't schedule very much for SC Waukesha. Is that correct?
Inside?
Yeah.
Our facility is, if during the week, nobody uses our facility but Waukesha South High School teams and programs.
Yeah,
it's packed from 6 in the morning till 10:30 at night. Weekends, we try to squeeze in what we can outside user groups and our junior groups. SC soccer is in our field house 7 to 10 most Sundays in the winter. That's it.
Yeah, that's what I see.
There's nowhere, again, and Kyle and Brian at their high schools, pretty much the same things. Thus, all those user groups get pushed into the middle schools and the grade schools, because that's where the space is.
So Brian, quick question for you. I mean, when these groups are trying to work it out between themselves, let's say Group A and Group B, because I don't want to use names of groups, and then they turn around and say, well, go to Brian, he'll, I mean, that's what I'm worried about, is this passing the buck system, that when we create, where one group seems to have an advantage over another group, and then that advantage wants to be maintained, they want to pass the buck off to the athletic directors, and I'm concerned that that's not necessarily the best situation for you guys. Your thoughts, questions?
I guess that would be the goal of putting what, I guess to Darren's point earlier, putting those timelines in so that groups have the opportunity for that discussion. I mean, and I'll put an A and a B in for you just to kind of give the example. So if we were looking at scheduling with the Junior North Star girls basketball program and the Junior North Star boys program, and those were two user groups that within that timeline came, and those were the only two, and that would never be the case, but they came the month in between that group making the request and the deadline or the timeline for the next group to request would be the time in which we would offer to host that meeting and say, if Kelly's a representative from the boys and Scott Osborne's a representative from the girls, we'd schedule a time to sit down and say, looking at the number of teams you have, the nights you need, and the elementary schools and middle schools and times that are available, what could this look like, and can you work with us? And knowing that if it's helpful to spread out practices so that we don't have all of our coaches in the girls' youth program scheduled into Monday nights and Tuesday nights in gyms, which wouldn't help them, that they can get Monday nights at one place, Tuesday nights at another, Wednesdays at another, and Thursdays at another, or however it best works for those groups to maximize the limited amount of volunteers and time they have that do this coaching. That would be the important step in the process, and I guess where they'd be looking for our help to facilitate those conversations, and hopefully the guidelines that are provided for us are clear to help us navigate that situation. We'd also be looking at some outside information as well, and some input from our head coaches in terms of programs. And this is a fictitious or facetious example. If we had a third grade basketball team that wanted to practice 4 days a week for 3 hours, as ADs, we'd want to look at USA basketball guidelines or talk to our coaches about what might be more appropriate, and then help work with that user group to say, that doesn't quite fit what we believe in as an organization is appropriate for a group that's affiliated with our high school programs, and we'd like to see this and come to some understanding on that. So if it's not us doing it, I don't know how, and I'm certainly willing to entertain it, because I guess I'm here to listen and learn as well what other ideas there are for facilitating those conversations and that work. So we're willing to help with it if we're asked to, and we certainly would like to. Does that address the question you had?
I guess the concerns that have been expressed to me is it's not just about the hours that people can get access to, which is a problem, but also the facilities, that if you give one group first pick of everything, then what's left over is limited in terms of the quality of the facilities. So as athletic directors, you'll have to manage how do you spread the quality around so that one group doesn't get favored over another group for quality of facilities as well. Some sort of procedure in that regard.
I would agree with that, because not all of our elementary spaces are equal, and also not all of our middle school spaces are similar. And then we have some facilities that don't quite fall into a certain pod, if you will, like STEM. Saratoga is a certain gym that would be helpful for our youth programs to have access to, just for appropriate age groups, size, floor, different things like that. And I think those are all pieces that I agree we need to work out so that we can approach it appropriately.
You're driving our ratings down at home.
Is that possible?
No.
There is always somebody.
He doesn't have his mic up, so that your students are going to miss hearing you on that one.
So we think we have a process to go at this next round. I mean, by the time this was up to date, the winter of 18-19 was already underway. So, this is really a 19-20, or I guess it could be spring too, but in terms of the high pressure basketball season, winter indoor usage, next year will be the first time we really roll this out. And we'll tweak it as we go. I think there's no doubt about that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I also just say thank you to Jess, because I know that this has been a very time-intensive project on her part. And again, as athletic directors, we, for good reasons, saw our school as a program that would be of value to use. And she's done, probably in some ways, she's inherited or received a lot of calls and different things. And
I believe she volunteered, if I remember right.
Yeah, so just from our standpoint, thank you, Jess, because I know it hasn't been easy, so.
So we can direct all the questions to the board to Jess, right?
Yes.
It was designed originally to take pressure off of the ADs, but you quickly realize they're the closest to the problems.
So we've reached the end. Now we're down to, is there any additional comments among board members on facility use? Still think we kind of have the cart before the horse, but the horse is yet to come, I guess. Yep. Other business for future committee meetings?
Just a reminder that I do plan on having that health insurance report, probably February or so, but I think it's time for us to update you overall on how we're doing.
I think we talked about an e-achieve meeting.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll make it.
Financial, and how do we boost that and go back to meeting goals. So.
That'd be in our report.
Well, we do have a need for executive session tonight.
We have a few needs, actually, but
Yeah,
a few topics in there.
A few topics. We need one for, we don't really have a litigation pending right now, right?
That's the DOT.
DOT, okay.
And,
So I need a motion for the litigation one, that's right.
Both, don't we?
Both, yeah, I need them for both.
Gonna make it, or you want me to make it?
Why is it just you two?
Why?
Okay.
I just haven't recognized her appropriately, shame on me.
I vote Diane. No, I was kidding. I propose we adjourn into closed session pursuant Wisconsin Statute 9.85, parenthesis 1, parenthesis G, to confer with the district's legal counsel, who is rendering oral or written advice concerning strategy to be adopted by the district with respect to litigation in which it is or is likely to become involved. The Department of Transportation. And Wisconsin Statute 19.85, parenthesis 1, parenthesis E, for deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. SC Waukesha Facility Use Contract Addendum and the sale of district property on Oakdale Drive, Tax Keys WAKC 1360198, WAKC 13770020002, and WAKC1377003.
Second.
It's a roll call vote.
Roll call vote. Thank you, Ms. Ronacek. Mr. McCaffrey?
Aye.
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 Aye. We'll take a 5-minute recess before we go into closed session. And we have, then we can come back. Okay.
Yeah, hurry up.